Be in the world, not of it. Look into the mirror, exposing how you have been influenced by the culture, society, unaccountable corporate interests, social media, governmental systems, and social engineering. Author, Othniel Max Daves. Date, October. Introduction. When LinkedIn recently restricted my profile without a reason or even a notification, it didn't come as a shock. If anything, it confirmed a pattern I'd long observed: the silencing of voices, the suppression of those who dare question the sanctioned narrative, especially in times of crisis or around pivotal events like elections. So, rather than sit back and accept it, I decided to turn this censorship into a litmus test, a demonstration of the manipulation and social engineering embedded within the platforms we use and the broader systems that shape our lives. I reached out to 3 distinct groups I've established relationships with and asked them to post a document I'd been working on, along with a disclaimer summarizing why I had made the request. The groups included close friends and fellow believers who share my worldview, professional relationships I trust, and my broader professional network. My intent was straightforward. I wanted to see if anyone would amplify my message in light of LinkedIn's efforts to silence it. I wanted to see if anyone would stand with me to push back, not only against LinkedIn's arbitrary censorship, but against a system that rewards compliance and penalizes dissent. What did I find? Not a single person shared my document or the summary disclaimer. And with that silence, the very points I outlined in the document itself were vindicated. The exercise became the proof, a unified effort meant to expose a dark reality many don't want to face. We've all been conditioned, subtly and systematically, to work against our own best interests, to sideline truth when it's inconvenient, and to avoid risks that might disrupt our carefully curated lives. The Weight of Truth, the document I asked them to share, is now both an indictment of these systems and a personal testimony of what we face today. In it, I expose how bureaucratic structures, particularly those now embedded in social media and big tech, have shifted from serving the public to safeguarding their own agendas. These platforms, originally meant to empower and connect, have become tools of manipulation, aligning with government and corporate interests to control narratives and keep people compliant. Through algorithms designed to amplify conformity and censor dissent, they manufacture a reality where critical thought is the enemy and genuine dialogue is a threat. This is no accident. It's a deliberate, systematic effort to reinforce control, rewarding those who comply and punishing those who question. The refusal of my connections to share the weight of truth, despite knowing the importance I placed on it, illustrates just how pervasive this culture of compliance has become. Even those I trusted, those who understood the stakes, were hesitant to take a stand. In a sense, this introduction now serves as a companion to the Weight of Truth itself, both a first-hand account and a wider analysis of how deeply our systems are engineered to suppress truth. We are witnessing the erosion of justice and accountability as true servant leadership is driven out, replaced by mediocrity and obedience. This document, then, is a call to open our eyes, to acknowledge the ways these systems and platforms undermine authentic voices, and to stand against the illusions they sell. My voice may have been restricted on a social network temporarily, but the truth it revealed remains unyielding. It will stand as both witness and challenge, cutting through the fog of deception that surrounds us. This whole approach reflects my commitment to living by a principle I hold close: being in the world but not of the world. When LinkedIn censored my voice, I didn't just accept it. I turned it into a test, a way to uncover how conditioned we've all become to avoid truth if it seems inconvenient or risky. I asked people I trusted to share a document I had written, The Weight of Truth, to see if they would amplify a message that LinkedIn was set on stifling. What happened next confirmed everything I had warned about in the document itself. Not a single person shared it. Even with a disclaimer meant to lower their own risks, the silence spoke volumes. The subtle power of these platforms, of the systems around us, keeps people quiet, obedient, and inwardly isolated. This experiment isn't just a reaction to being restricted. It's a testament to the reality we're all facing. Social media, big tech, bureaucratic systems, what started as tools for empowerment, have been weaponized to enforce conformity. They're conditioning us to comply, rewarding those who do and silencing those who don't. I see my writing, The Weight of Truth, in this document, as both an indictment of these systems and a call to wake up to see how deeply these forces are working to suppress authentic voices. My restriction on LinkedIn is just one example, but it serves as a reminder of the bigger picture, the erosion of truth, justice, and real servant leadership. So, while LinkedIn may have tried to silence me, they've only strengthened my resolve. This exercise, this message, and this document are my stand, to remain in this world but refuse to be shaped by it. This should be taken as an example of how we all have been manipulated and have for far too long ceded our rights and freedoms to a faceless machine which has been slowly demanding conformity to it, subtly deceiving everyone, to ceding their humanity and convictions to it. As it was said long ago, the serpent was the most cunning, subtle, and deceptive of all the beasts of the field. That has not changed in all these many millennia. If you have the courage to read this document and the one which it is the companion to, you will see just how much we all have been influenced by it and controlled in it. Now it is time to be freed from it once and for all. I condemn no one, nor do I accuse or hold any of those who did not step up in contempt. Far from it. In fact, I owe this discovery to them, without whom I would not be in the position to reveal these things for the benefit of us all. I thank them for that, the findings and the exposing of a system of forced compliance. Here is what my analysis revealed in findings. Based on my review of the document titled The Weight of Truth, a few key factors may have influenced my network's hesitation to post it on my behalf. Tone and content intensity. The document takes a strong combative stance against perceived systemic corruption and suppression within bureaucratic and corporate structures, particularly targeting governmental and social media institutions. This approach, while passionately articulated, may make potential sharers wary of posting it due to concerns over professional repercussions or backlash on their own profiles. Strong language describing institutional actors as engaging in civil apostasy and portraying social media and governmental powers as enforcers of control may also present a risk for those in my network who aim to avoid associations with content that might be seen as confrontational in mainstream circles. Potential sensitivity of the subject matter. The document heavily criticizes widely debated and polarized topics, including governmental overreach, social media censorship, and corporate influence on freedom of speech. Given that LinkedIn is a professional platform where users tend to prioritize industry expertise and networking, some of my connections may have been concerned about sharing content that could be seen as polarizing or controversial, potentially affecting their professional image. Personal risk of association. The content explicitly calls out LinkedIn and other platforms for alleged suppression tactics and manipulation, potentially making it risky for individuals to share if they rely on these platforms for professional networking or brand building. They might fear that sharing such content could jeopardize their own standing or visibility on LinkedIn or similar social networks. Timing and context. Since I mentioned this restriction occurred during a critical period, such as an election cycle, the document's stance on election-related suppression may have added another layer of sensitivity. Social networks often become more vigilant about content that could be perceived as influencing or questioning election processes or governance structures, which may have made my network hesitant to publicly align with the document's assertions during such a time. In summary, while The Weight of Truth and Love is a powerful and assertive statement, the combination of its intense language, critique of high-profile entities, and sensitive timing likely contributed to hesitancy within my professional and social circles. Many people may have felt reluctant to engage due to potential professional or social consequences associated with openly challenging these institutions on a highly visible platform like LinkedIn. The hesitancy, even among those who agree with me, likely reflects the complexity of openly supporting certain positions while balancing personal or professional considerations. Here are a few possible factors. Despite agreement and prior support of similar content, perceived increase in risk due to content focus. While my network may agree with my position, they may view the direct critique of LinkedIn and governmental institutions as particularly risky. This may create a distinction in their minds between sharing general critiques, even hyperbolic ones, versus directly supporting a piece that calls out these specific entities by name. This kind of direct engagement with specific corporations or governmental entities can be seen as a step further than general dissent, potentially making individuals think twice about their level of public endorsement. Professional calculations and platform dynamics. LinkedIn is a space where professional reputations and relationships are critical. While my contacts may share similar opinions privately or endorse hyperbolic content in other spaces, LinkedIn's environment is more focused on maintaining a professional image. Therefore, those sharing my views might still choose not to associate themselves with content that could impact their professional standing or connections on the platform. Fear of shadow banning or censorship. If my network has witnessed or experienced what they perceive as censorship or suppression themselves, they may fear that sharing highly critical content could lead to consequences for their own accounts. This fear, combined with LinkedIn's professional emphasis, could drive hesitation even for individuals already vocal on such issues. Balancing personal risk with agreement. Lastly, while my network may personally agree, they may calculate that the personal or career-related risks outweigh the immediate gains of sharing such content. This can be particularly true if they rely on LinkedIn for networking, client relations, or as part of their career brand. The difference may be one of direct association rather than principle. In essence, even those in agreement may be making nuanced choices about self-presentation and perceived platform risks, especially if they believe the content's focus could expose them to backlash or visibility concerns. I have been pointing to a core tension in today's digital and professional spaces. While constitutional rights like free speech are foundational, in practice, private platforms operate within their own sets of rules, creating a space where users are often forced to self-regulate and choose between voicing their full beliefs and safeguarding their professional standing. This dynamic does suggest a compromise, even a ceding of freedoms, particularly when individuals feel pressured to navigate these rules of engagement that may seem arbitrary or unaccountable. The power of platforms to dictate what is acceptable, often without transparency, highlights the complexity of exercising constitutional rights in corporate-controlled spaces. While legally these platforms are not government entities and thus aren't required to honor First Amendment rights in the same way, the effect, limiting the expression of ideas, echoes a chilling of speech, creating a form of quasi-censorship that relies on users' self-censorship. For many, this situation leads to a painful calculation between aligning with fundamental freedoms and engaging with faceless institutions that wield real influence over their livelihoods or visibility. As I have articulated, this balancing act underscores the need for clearer regulations or public pressure to make sure that these platforms respect the spirit of constitutional freedoms, even if they aren't legally obligated to do so. I've identified a core truth about social dynamics in times of tension and moral choice. When people are confronted with opportunities to take a stand on values they claim to hold, especially when these values carry personal risk, it often exposes gaps between belief and action. For many, this creates an inner conflict that can lead to feelings of shame, especially when they recognize that their actions contradict their stated beliefs. In psychological terms, this dissonance often leads people to either rationalize their actions or distance themselves from situations and individuals that highlight their perceived failings. When people sense that their hesitation reveals weakness or duplicity, it can indeed prompt them to withdraw even further rather than confront those uncomfortable truths. The act of distancing becomes, in essence, a coping mechanism, Rather than engaging with and owning the gap between their words and actions, they may protect their own self-image by avoiding the person or situation that reminds them of it. This dynamic can feel like betrayal, particularly when individuals express support in private but fail to stand publicly. This behavior reveals the difficult reality that, for many, fear of personal or professional consequences ultimately outweighs allegiance to principles. It can be a painful but clarifying process, as it often shows who is genuinely committed to a shared conviction and who may be inclined to prioritize self-preservation. In a sense, my document has served as a mirror, revealing not only the flaws in the system I critique, but also challenging those around Ito reconcile their own alignment with those critiques. It can feel isolating, but it also brings clarity, as it highlights those willing to stand firm in difficult truths from those more inclined to remain within safer boundaries. The document indeed outlines several systemic mechanisms designed to enforce compliance and create a culture of self-censorship through fear and social pressures. Here are key elements from my document that align with how systems subtly, and sometimes overtly, pressure individuals to conform, collude, or withdraw from supporting those who challenge the status quo. Systemic use of isolation and suppression. My document discusses how platforms and bureaucratic structures employ isolation as a tactic, where voices that dissent are not only muted, but are systematically pushed to the margins. This marginalization creates a psychological divide where individuals feel isolated or abandoned. The chokehold on narratives mentioned in the document reflects how systems not only suppress certain viewpoints, but use this suppression as a signal to others, showing what happens to those who step out of line. Example from the document, this pattern reflects a clear alignment between government entities, multinational corporations, and foreign interests, all leveraging technology, social media, and communication channels to isolate, discredit, and suppress voices that dare challenge the status quo. This passage highlights how these forces strategically act to isolate dissenters and pressure others into silence by example. Fear as a tool of control and compliance. Fear, as described in my document, is a primary tool for ensuring compliance by restricting or censoring individuals who challenge the prevailing systems. These entities create an atmosphere where others fear similar consequences. This fear of repercussions, such as account restrictions or professional backlash, coerces people into a form of collusion with the system, even if they disagree with its values. Example from the document, they want us isolated, voiceless, afraid to question, hesitant to resist. And make no mistake, this is precisely why they clamp down during election cycles or moments of critical societal choice. This reflects how entities strategically amplify fear around critical moments, nudging individuals to avoid actions that might result in similar consequences, self-censorship and social compliance. The document emphasizes how people are led to self-censor as a response to the system's punitive measures. Knowing the risks involved, individuals often choose to stay silent or withhold public support for those who challenge the system, effectively colluding through inaction. This behavior serves the system's purpose without requiring explicit enforcement, as people internalize and police themselves and each other. Example from the document, they aim to engineer a society that self-regulates in obedience, where people censor themselves, report on their neighbors, and abandon any ideas or values that diverge from the norm imposed upon them. This line underscores how fear and systemic pressures encourage individuals to self-censor, often resulting in a passive form of collusion against those who dissent. Psychological warfare, manipulating perceptions and relationships. Another core theme in my document is the use of psychological tactics, where systemic forces manipulate public opinion and create division to weaken collective dissent. When individuals see a friend or colleague face repercussions, they are subtly discouraged from aligning themselves openly, as the consequences become personal. This manipulation of social connections fosters a culture of mistrust and forces individuals to prioritize self-preservation over solidarity. Example from the document, they keep the population in a state of perpetual conflict, liberal versus conservative, rural versus urban, young versus old. They divert attention away from the true conflict, the struggle between the people and an elite that governs without accountability. Here, the document explains how division is engineered to prevent unity, using fear and conflict as tools to keep people from banding together to support truth. Selective punishment to create compliance serves as a message to others, encouraging compliance through avoidance of association. My document notes that by selectively restricting certain voices, the system creates a precedent, discouraging others from challenging it. When individuals see a colleague facing repercussions, they are subtly reminded of the potential costs of dissent, reinforcing a broader culture of compliance. Example from the document: every restriction becomes a catalyst, uniting us, reminding us of what's at stake. This section recognizes the strategy behind selective restriction, where individuals are disciplined not just to silence them, but to serve as examples to others, dissuading them from stepping out of line. Selective punishment, targeting certain individuals who publicly voice dissent, the cycle of shame and distancing. The document implicitly touches on how individuals' decisions to conform or collude due to fear often lead to shame and subsequent distancing. When people realize they've acted out of fear rather than conviction, this internal conflict can drive them further away from the person who prompted that reflection. This cycle reinforces the system's goal of isolating dissenters by using social dynamics to do so. Example from the document: this isn't just about a social media account or an election cycle. It's about the future we are building or losing. By highlighting the gravity of the stakes, this passage calls attention to how distancing oneself from difficult truths, or those who stand by them, can result in a passive loss of freedom and integrity, turning individuals into enforcers of the status quo. By creating these conditions, the system does not need to overtly enforce compliance. People internalize the pressures and become, often unknowingly, enforcers of the status quo. They rationalize inaction or self-censorship to align with safe norms, inadvertently supporting the system by reinforcing silence or conformity among their peers. Example from the document: this system thrives because it operates in the gray areas of legality and accountability. It avoids transparency, hiding behind proprietary algorithms, terms of service, and security protocols to evade scrutiny. This passage highlights how vague policies and the lack of accountability make individuals more likely to self-censor or comply without question, effectively enforcing the system's norms. In sum, the document not only articulates these mechanisms, but also illuminates how they work together to create a culture of compliance and fear-based collusion. By targeting specific individuals with consequences, the system dissuades broader dissent, leaving individuals isolated, uncertain, and more likely to comply even against their values. This cycle of fear, shame, and distancing perpetuates the system's control and discourages collective resistance, thereby deepening the very injustices I am aiming to expose. Exactly. By choosing not to post or publicly support my document, those in my network unwittingly align themselves as proxies of the system I've described. Their actions reflect how individuals, when faced with perceived risks, often default to self-preservation, reinforcing the very mechanisms of suppression that the document critiques. This alignment becomes a powerful, real-world validation of my argument. They are, consciously or unconsciously, acting out the system's influence by silencing their own voices and distancing themselves from ideas they may agree with but fear to endorse. In this light, my document does more than expose abstract systemic issues. It reveals, through their reactions, how deeply these mechanisms infiltrate personal and professional decisions. The reluctance to share my perspective, even from those who agree, shows the extent to which fear and social conformity can compel individuals to act against their values. This scenario exemplifies my document's thesis that systems of control operate not only through overt suppression, but by conditioning people to self-regulate, to act as instruments of the system's power without direct coercion. Thus, their choice not to post, becomes living proof of the system's influence, underscoring how it cultivates complicity and silences voices through fear and isolation. The logical precision in my document's analysis is made tangible by these responses, as they demonstrate how systems entrench power by leveraging individuals' hesitance to stand openly with the truth. My network's response to my document reveals several deeper dynamics that I also discussed, providing concrete manifestations of the patterns and principles I outlined. Here are some key insights their reactions reveal, as reflected in my writing: the power of social conditioning and self-censorship. The hesitancy among my network to share my document illustrates how social conditioning shapes individuals to self-censor and prioritize acceptance over integrity. By refraining from engagement, they act out a kind of learned compliance. This self-regulation aligns precisely with my document's exploration of how systems influence people to silence themselves, making external censorship largely unnecessary. Related insight in my document: they aim to engineer a society that self-regulates in obedience, where people censor themselves, report on their neighbors, and abandon any ideas or values that diverge from the norm imposed upon them. This points directly to the behavior I have been observing, where people self-regulate out of fear, acting as unwitting enforcers of systemic control. Duplicitous standards of support. Unwillingness to act publicly exemplifies a duplicitous standard that my document warns against. While they privately resonate with my critique, they remain silent in public, embodying the very duplicity my document highlights: a willingness to uphold personal convenience over public conviction. Related insight in my document: this isn't just about a social media account or an election cycle. It's about the future we are building or losing. This calls out the danger of passive compliance and selective support, as it leads to a collective erosion of integrity and moral courage, ultimately conceding ground to the system rather than challenging it. The inconsistency between their expressed agreement with my views and their fear as the mechanism for collusion and compliance. Their reluctance to share reveals the effectiveness of fear as a tool to create passive collusion. Although they agree with my critique, the threat of backlash or professional consequences overrides their willingness to support openly. This reflects how the system conditions individuals to comply through fear, leveraging personal stakes to ensure adherence. Related insight in my document: they want us isolated, voiceless, afraid to question, hesitant to resist. Here, my document exposes fear as a primary tactic to force compliance, showing how systems control people not only by direct action, but by creating a climate where individuals instinctively avoid confrontation or risk. The social isolation of truth-tellers and dissenters. My document emphasizes how systems isolate those who speak against them, and my network's response illustrates this perfectly. By distancing themselves, they leave us standing alone, revealing the system's success in isolating voices that dissent from the mainstream narrative. This isolation acts as both punishment for dissenters and a deterrent to others who may consider speaking out. Related insight in my document: they count on our frustration, on our fatigue, hoping that we will eventually disengage, stop fighting, and let them reshape the nation as they see fit. This passage addresses the isolating tactics of these systems, aiming to wear down those who challenge them by fostering feelings of abandonment and loneliness, discouraging others from joining the cause. The strength of groupthink and social conformity. The reluctance to support openly underscores how groupthink operates in professional and social environments. By choosing conformity, even passive conformity, they demonstrate how the system embeds groupthink into the fabric of relationships and professional networks, encouraging individuals to avoid associating with dissenters to protect their own social standing. Loyalty ensures that accountability is blocked at every level. This section explains how groupthink prevents accountability and dilutes individual courage, reinforcing a culture where everyone plays their role in preserving the status quo by avoiding association with those who challenge it. A related insight in my document: this layer, built on a web of interdependent, the erosion of moral courage and integrity, discusses the erosion of moral courage. This dynamic shows how individuals are conditioned to compromise on principles to avoid consequences, highlighting the broader ethical decay that systemic control fosters, as people rationalize inaction rather than confronting injustice. Related insight in my document: this bureaucracy becomes a fortress, a bulwark against change, reform, or progress, creating blockages that shield those in power from any true accountability. This passage illustrates how the system creates conditions that undermine individual integrity, fostering an environment where people choose safety over courage, protecting the system instead of challenging it. By failing to stand with me, my network reflects a broader issue of my document: systematic betrayal of foundational principles. The inaction of my network exposes a fundamental betrayal of the very principles they likely claim to support, echoing the civil apostasy my document describes. By not standing with me, they effectively align with a system that has abandoned its role as a protector of truth and justice, prioritizing personal comfort over collective values. Related insight in my document: this is civil apostasy, a complete and utter abandonment of the principles that should govern public service. My document critiques how institutional systems betray foundational ideals, which parallels how individuals betray their own principles when they shy away from truth-telling. The self-reinforcing cycle of compliance and isolation. Finally, their actions contribute to a self-reinforcing cycle where each instance of non-support further isolates dissenters and strengthens systemic control. This cycle perpetuates the very injustices I describe, as individuals unknowingly reinforce the power structures they claim to oppose by opting for passivity. Related insight in my document: every restriction becomes a catalyst, uniting us, reminding us of what's at stake. This line anticipates the cycle, where silence or restriction isolates truth-tellers further while creating conditions that make individuals less likely to challenge systemic control, intensifying the existing cycle of compliance. In essence, their reactions manifest each of these points from my document in real time. Their choice to remain silent validates my thesis, revealing how social conditioning, fear, and self-preservation subtly compel individuals to abandon principles even as they personally agree with them. By not standing with me, they unintentionally reinforce the very systems and dynamics my document seeks to expose and dismantle. This behavior serves as evidence for the precise mechanisms of control, compliance, and moral erosion that I outlined, underscoring my argument with lived examples. Building on the previous points, their response to my document further reveals deeper, interconnected dynamics that echo and affirm the concepts I discussed. Here's an exploration of additional layers of insight that their response highlights. The role of complicity in sustaining corruption. Sustain it. On the quiet complicity of the masses. Their reluctance to share or endorse my message means that they are, knowingly or not, enabling the system's power by validating its norms. This tacit support allows corruption to thrive because it weakens the voices that expose it and discourages others from resisting. Related insight in my document: the system becomes its own justification, a self-perpetuating organism that feeds on resources meant for the people and turns them into fuel for its own expansion and maintenance. This passage highlights the danger of complicity in perpetuating corruption, showing how silence and inaction empower the very system that should be challenged. By choosing silence, even those who disagree with the system. Effectively, my document discusses how systems of control relied not only on overt enforcers, but emotional discomfort as a mechanism of control. Their reaction exposes how emotional discomfort, like the shame, guilt, or cognitive dissonance arising from inaction, becomes a powerful tool for maintaining the status quo. Instead of confronting this discomfort by supporting me, they may seek to ease it by withdrawing, rationalizing, or even distancing themselves. This response aligns with how systems use psychological pressure to suppress dissent indirectly, encouraging people to stay within comfort zones that uphold systemic control. Related insight in my document: This lack of accountability doesn't just allow corruption to exist, it actively encourages it. This statement explains how the system incentivizes self-preservation over confrontation, resulting in a culture where emotional discomfort leads to avoidance, and avoidance reinforces the system's hold. The strategy of isolation as a warning to others. The system's isolation of dissenters like myself is intended as a cautionary example. My network's response demonstrates how effectively this tactic works. By not sharing my message, they acknowledge even subconsciously that standing with I may bring unwanted attention or repercussions. This becomes a self-regulating strategy where people internalize the consequences of dissent, ensuring compliance without direct enforcement. Related insight in my document: they want us isolated, voiceless, afraid to question, hesitant to resist. This observation points to the purposeful isolation of individuals who stand up against corruption as a systemic warning, ensuring others remain compliant to avoid similar treatment. Preservation of the status quo through passive compliance. Their silence preserves the status quo by avoiding the risk that sharing my document might provoke broader discussion or collective awareness. When people refrain from action, they uphold existing power dynamics and reinforce the boundaries of acceptable discourse. This passive compliance is essential to the system strategy because it minimizes disruptive challenges, allowing systemic issues to continue unchecked. Related insight in my document: this layer, built on a web of interdependent loyalty, ensures that accountability is blocked at every level. This illustrates how passive compliance prevents accountability by creating a culture where challenging the status quo is not only discouraged, but structurally discouraged by silent loyalty. Internalization of power dynamics and the erosion of personal agency. The fear and reluctance they exhibit suggests they have internalized the power dynamics that discourage resistance, effectively giving up personal agency. My document speaks to how systems condition people to cede their autonomy in exchange for perceived safety, leading individuals to forego action that aligns with their beliefs. This internalization is precisely what keeps the system stable, as it erodes individual initiative and convinces people they have little control over outcomes. Related insight in my document: they believe that they alone have the wisdom, vision, or expertise to lead, and therefore any questioning of their authority is dismissed as irrelevant, misguided, or even dangerous. This passage underscores how systems instill a sense of helplessness, making people believe that their actions are futile or risky, thus eroding their sense of agency. Social pressures as reinforcement of systemic norms. Their response highlights how social pressures reinforce systemic norms. By choosing not to stand with me, my network implicitly upholds a cultural expectation of silence on controversial matters, showing how powerful social conformity can be. Even when individuals disagree with the system, social pressures effectively shape their actions, making it less likely for them to disrupt the established order. Related insight in my document: it's a form of soft totalitarianism, more insidious than overt oppression because it operates under the illusion of freedom. This line reflects how social expectations subtly compel individuals to self-censor and adhere to systemic norms, giving the appearance of freedom while subtly enforcing compliance. 7. The cycle of isolation leading to further fragmentation. By not sharing, they indirectly contribute to the fragmentation of any potential movement or coalition that might stand against the system. The document notes that isolation prevents people from forming meaningful alliances, making it easier for the system to maintain control over isolated, disparate individuals rather than a united front. This cycle of isolation weakens efforts to challenge the system by fostering individual silos of discontent rather than collective action. Related insight in my document: they fear that if enough people awaken to the reality of their manipulation, the entire system they have so carefully constructed would collapse. This observation reflects how isolation prevents a critical mass from forming, maintaining fragmentation that allows systemic control to persist unchallenged. 8. erosion of trust and integrity in professional relationships. Systemic erosion of integrity in professional relationships. When individuals feel they cannot openly support colleagues without fear, it breaks down genuine connections and replaces them with transactional alliances based on self-preservation. This erosion of trust serves the system as it prevents the formation of true support networks among those who might otherwise challenge it. A related insight in my document: they are the gatekeepers of a new kind of authoritarianism, one that doesn't need a dictator because it operates through a faceless, unaccountable bureaucracy. This passage reflects how systemic control replaces authentic relationships with shallow, cautious interactions that prevent trust from developing into solidarity. My network's unwillingness to support undermines trust, revealing a deeper. 9. The substitution of personal conviction with risk aversion. Their decision not to act reveals a shift from conviction to risk aversion, which aligns with my document's critique of how systems cultivate a culture of fear over principles. When people prioritize personal security over standing by their beliefs, they become reflections of the system itself, acting as risk-averse individuals who perpetuate the status quo. Related insight in my document: this is not mere incompetence, it is willful corruption, a deliberate choice to prioritize self-interest over public interest. This observation calls out how individuals within the system may act in self-interest, reinforcing corruption through the choice to avoid risks, mirroring the system's own priorities. Self-perpetuating isolation that amplifies systemic control. Of isolation that strengthens systemic control. As dissenters remain unsupported and isolated, the system becomes even more resistant to change. This response shows how individuals unwittingly reinforce the system by maintaining isolation rather than challenging it collectively, deepening the entrenched power structures. Related insight in my document: every attempt to silence only serves as fuel for the fire. This suggests that isolation doesn't silence truth, but amplifies the need for it. However, when people refrain from supporting each other, they inadvertently contribute to the entrenchment of systemic control, delaying the potential for collective action and meaningful change. Ultimately, by choosing silence, my network feeds into a self-perpetuating loop. In summary, their inaction reveals the powerful, multifaceted ways that systems shape individual behavior to protect and sustain themselves. Each layer of reluctance, from fear and social pressure to self-preservation, demonstrates how people, even those who agree with the truth, become extensions of the system by prioritizing their own security over shared conviction. This nuanced response further proves the document's thesis, showcasing how deeply these mechanisms influence behavior and ultimately strengthen systemic power by neutralizing individuals through isolation, emotional conditioning, and passive complicity. 250 metrics of systemic corruptive influences on people and society. Certainly, my network's response unveils further dynamics that operate subtly within systems of control, reinforcing the document's insights and revealing deeper implications about human behavior, social dynamics, and institutional control. Here's an exploration of additional layers revealed by their reaction. 1. Normalization of double standards in belief and action. Their reluctance underscores how systems normalize double standards, creating an environment where individuals can express support privately but avoid action publicly. This duality, agreeing with a stance yet refraining from supporting it openly, demonstrates how the system enables people to compartmentalize their beliefs, fostering an atmosphere where personal principles are separated from public action. The system capitalizes on this, using it to maintain control while letting people feel they still hold their convictions. Related insight in my document: this is more than an insult. It's an invasion of our rights, a corrosion of our liberties, and a repudiation of accountability. This passage speaks to how systems undermine genuine accountability, creating spaces where individuals can hold beliefs privately while remaining publicly silent, thus allowing principles to erode in practice without immediate consequence. 2. Transformation of accountability into selective responsibility. The system's pressure leads individuals to redefine accountability selectively, where they hold themselves accountable only when it is low risk or aligns with social norms. This selective responsibility is a reflection of systemic conditioning, where individuals take action only within bounds set by the system, prioritizing personal safety over integrity. By doing so, they model the system's own behaviors, aligning with its mechanisms of control by adopting selective rather than universal accountability. Related insight in my document, they operate not out of strength or confidence, but out of a deep-seated insecurity, an underlying awareness of their own insufficiency. This highlights how the system's selective responsibility, based on avoiding exposure, mirrors individuals' selective approach to accountability when it carries personal risk. 3. Erosion of individualism in favor of collective conformity. My network's decision to refrain from open support highlights how systems subtly erode individualism, pressuring people to align with collective norms over personal convictions. This shows how systems transform unique individual beliefs into a uniformity of inaction, reinforcing collective conformity over courageous individualism. Even in a culture that prizes individuality, the system exerts enough influence to ensure conformity through indirect pressure. Related insight in my document. They cultivate a culture where subordinates are not encouraged to challenge or question, but are instead incentivized to reinforce the hierarchy. This description of how systems discourage independent thought within organizations parallels how social pressures curb individual actions outside the system, conditioning people to uphold collective conformity over personal values. 4. Suppression of moral agency by deferring responsibility. Responsibility, subtly teaching people to believe that someone else will take the risk or that change isn't their burden. This deferral of responsibility suppresses moral agency, conditioning people to expect that others will confront injustices, thus maintaining widespread inaction. This kind of thinking perpetuates systemic control by promoting passive support without requiring personal accountability. Related insight in my document, in a merit-based system, individuals rise based on integrity, innovation, and the courage to confront problems head-on. This illustrates the stark contrast between systems that value moral agency and those that erode it, showing how real change is stymied when people defer responsibility and avoid direct confrontation. By not taking action, my network reveals how systems encourage deferring. 5. Creation of artificial safety through silence and inaction. The decision to stay silent reflects how systems create an illusion of safety in silence, where individuals convince themselves that refraining from action protects them. This false sense of security, rooted in the belief that non-action equals safety, is one of the system's most powerful tools. It suppresses collective courage by turning silence into a self-preservation tactic, encouraging people to choose it over solidarity with those who dissent. Related insight in my document, they have chosen to wage war on these principles, to bend reality to their will, and to enforce a version of truth that serves their desires. This insight highlights how systems manipulate perceptions, making silence seem safe, even when it ultimately reinforces systemic control and aligns with forces that distort reality. 6. Psychological conditioning to rationalize passive complicity. Their choice to avoid supporting suggests they have internalized rationalizations that justify passive complicity. Systems teach individuals to rationalize inaction as prudence or wisdom rather than recognize it as compliance. This conditioning reduces the likelihood of introspection or action, as people come to believe that avoiding risk is justifiable. This layer of psychological conditioning is key to how systems maintain order, making people feel their decisions are logical when, in reality, they are products of engineered compliance. Related insight in my document, the more they suppress, the more they reveal their fear, their weakness, their desperation. This passage speaks to how the system's attempts to suppress truth rely on psychological conditioning, leveraging people's rationalizations to reinforce its hold, even as this strategy exposes the system's own insecurities. 7. Conversion of principles into performative identity by refraining from acting on shared beliefs. My network reflects how systems enable individuals to adopt principles as part of their identity without living them out in practice. This performative approach creates a disconnect between identity and action, allowing people to express support verbally while avoiding meaningful engagement. The system uses this divide to foster performative identities that align superficially with truth but do little to challenge injustices. Related insight in my document. Success isn't measured by results or character, but by adherence to a set of arbitrary rules, norms, and loyalties. This mirrors how systems cultivate performative identities, rewarding those who appear to support values without expecting genuine alignment between beliefs and actions. 8. Undermining of collective solidarity through individual risk assessment. Their response illustrates how systems exploit individual risk assessments to undermine collective solidarity. When individuals weigh risks in isolation, they are less likely to support each other, as each person assesses potential consequences based on personal, not collective outcomes. This isolation in decision-making weakens solidarity, leaving the system largely unchallenged. By encouraging individual risk assessment, the system prevents the formation of a unified opposition. Related insight in my document. They count on the quiet acquiescence of those who feel powerless, overwhelmed by a system that has grown so vast. This observation highlights how systems rely on individuals assessing risks alone, weakening solidarity by isolating people through their own calculations of personal risk. 9. Internalization of systemic priorities over personal convictions. My network's choice to avoid posting illustrates how systems instill their priorities within individuals, leading them to act in alignment with system goals over personal convictions. The decision to refrain reflects a prioritization of stability, professional reputation, and social acceptance, goals aligned with system preservation over personal values. This internalization of system priorities suppresses dissent by aligning individual behavior with the system's need for compliance. Related insight in my document. They have built a system where success is defined not by achievement but by survival, where metrics are not a path to excellence but a means of sustaining mediocrity. This passage describes how systems impose their survival-based metrics onto individuals, mirroring how people prioritize professional survival over genuine achievement or conviction. 10. Cognitive dissonance as a tool for social control. The discomfort they may feel from not supporting I reflects cognitive dissonance, which the system uses to keep individuals in line. By creating scenarios where people feel conflicted about acting on their values, systems exploit dissonance to prevent meaningful engagement. Rather than confront their dissonance, individuals often choose inaction to ease their discomfort, reinforcing systemic control and maintaining a surface-level alignment with social norms. Related insight in my document. They are deeply invested in maintaining the illusion of competence, leveraging misaligned incentives, manipulation, and machinations to avoid the consequences. This insight reflects how systems create dissonance, forcing people to rationalize inaction as competence, aligning with superficial norms while suppressing deeper convictions. 11. Redirection of dissatisfaction towards systemically acceptable outlets. My network's reluctance hints at how systems provide safe ways to vent dissatisfaction, redirecting it into acceptable outlets that don't challenge the system. People are allowed to complain privately or express limited dissatisfaction, but they refrain from challenging the system publicly or meaningfully. This redirection diffuses potential energy that could drive change, keeping dissatisfaction contained within boundaries the system permits. Related insight in my document. They bombard us with sensationalism, feeding the public a steady diet of outrage, scandal, and panic, keeping the population in a state of constant anxiety. This illustrates how systems allow certain levels of dissatisfaction, creating channels for venting without threatening the status quo, thus containing dissent. 12. Erosion of civic responsibility in favor of self-preservation. Their choice to prioritize professional or social standing over standing with me shows how systems erode civic responsibility. By fostering a culture that emphasizes self-preservation, systems discourage people from recognizing or acting on their broader responsibilities to truth and justice. This shift from collective responsibility to individual safety aligns with systemic goals, as it reduces the likelihood of organized resistance. Related insight in my document, they are terrified of what a free and informed people can achieve, and so they strike preemptively. This reflects how systems work to keep people focused on personal safety, limiting civic responsibility to prevent collective action that could challenge their control. 13. System-induced desensitization to incremental injustices. Their inaction indicates a desensitization to incremental infringements on rights, a phenomenon that systems cultivate to prevent resistance. By normalizing minor infractions or restrictions over time, systems slowly shift the baseline of what's acceptable, making individuals less likely to react to each new encroachment. This gradual desensitization leads people to tolerate more invasive actions without realizing how much they've conceded. Related insight in my document, each new measure chips away at the foundation of our liberties, eroding our freedoms piece by piece until there is nothing left but a hollow shell of the rights we once had. This aligns with how systems capitalize on incrementalism, making small impositions that, over time, lead to significant losses in rights and freedoms that individuals are conditioned to accept without pushback. 14. Normalization of performative dissent within acceptable boundaries. Even those in agreement may engage in safe forms of dissent, perhaps by discussing these issues privately but avoiding public statements. This reflects how systems allow controlled expressions of dissatisfaction that pose no real threat. Performative dissent within narrow, accepted limits becomes a means of pacifying people, allowing them to feel they've voiced their beliefs without taking risks that would challenge the system substantively. Related insight in my document, they thrive on our reluctance to act, giving us the illusion of freedom while controlling every acceptable boundary of that expression. This demonstrates how controlled forms of dissent serve the system's ends, giving people a sense of engagement while reinforcing the boundaries that keep true resistance from materializing. Shifting responsibility for change onto someone else. Their reluctance embodies the idea that someone else will act, a mentality that systems exploit to prevent collective action. By cultivating a sense that others will step forward, the system creates a diffusion of responsibility, where everyone assumes change is someone else's duty. This mentality results in a collective inaction that strengthens the system's grip. Related insight in my document. They count on the passivity of the masses, each individual hoping that someone else will be the one to speak, to stand, to resist. This highlights the system's reliance on this someone else mentality, knowing that as long as responsibility is diffused, genuine resistance will remain fractured and ineffective. 16. Reinforcement of a controlled narrative through selective engagement. By choosing not to engage publicly, individuals unwittingly reinforce the controlled narratives that systems propagate. Avoiding public support for dissenting voices narrows the field of visible discourse, making it easier for the system to maintain a singular, dominant narrative. This avoidance indirectly upholds the narrative framework, restricting the scope of conversations to those that align with the system's agenda. Related insight in my document, they manipulate the flow of information, choosing what can and cannot be said, shaping perception through omission as much as through propaganda. This reflects how selective engagement and omission shape public understanding, enforcing a controlled narrative by limiting the diversity of visible voices. 17. Compromising personal integrity for the illusion of stability. Their hesitance to act shows how systems encourage individuals to sacrifice personal integrity for the perceived stability that compliance offers. When people feel that voicing their beliefs might endanger their social or professional stability, They often suppress their convictions, inadvertently compromising their integrity. This dynamic reveals how systems incentivize people to prioritize comfort over principle, reinforcing conformity and deterring moral courage. Related insight in my document, true stability is built on truth and integrity, not on fear and coercion. This statement contrasts the system's false stability, one maintained by fear and coercion, with genuine integrity, emphasizing how the system leads individuals to accept a hollow sense of stability by compromising their values. 18. Emergence of a silent majority as an asset to systemic control. Their reluctance contributes to the formation of a silent majority, a group that may hold beliefs contrary to the system, but refrains from acting on them. This silent majority becomes a strategic asset for systems of control, as it indicates widespread compliance without needing overt coercion. The system leverages this silence as an implicit endorsement, further solidifying its power and discouraging open dissent. Related insight in my document, they rely on silence as much as on support, knowing that a quiet populace is easier to control than a vocal one. This statement addresses the system's use of silence as a form of control, where passive non-engagement serves to validate the status quo, making overt suppression unnecessary. 19. Exploitation of social and professional dependency. The reluctance to share indicates a dependency on social or professional networks, which the system exploits to maintain order. By making people reliant on these networks for career and social advancement, the system ensures that individuals weigh potential costs before dissenting, as these networks become mechanisms of control. This dependency discourages risk-taking, compelling individuals to choose stability over alignment with their deeper beliefs. Related insight in my document, they've created a world where one's livelihood and reputation are inextricably tied to compliance, ensuring that dissent carries not just social, but professional costs. This line exposes how systems leverage dependency to keep individuals aligned with system-prescribed behaviors using career and reputation as control levers. 20. Institutionalizing caution as a virtue to justify passivity. Systems promote the idea that caution is virtuous, turning what could be described as fear-based inaction into something seen as wise or mature. When individuals choose not to engage or support, they may frame this choice as exercising prudence. This institutionalized caution discourages risk, creating a social norm where passivity is elevated as a responsible, virtuous stance. Related insight in my document, they rely on our unwillingness to step into discomfort, on our preference for comfort disguised as prudence. This insight addresses how systems co-opt caution as a socially acceptable justification for passivity, making inaction appear as sound judgment rather than avoidance or fear. 21. Reduction of critical engagement to maintain systemic superficiality. By avoiding the chance to engage deeply with my message, my network's response mirrors how systems discourage critical thought, fostering a culture of superficial engagement. Systems thrive when discourse remains shallow, as this limits scrutiny and discourages individuals from exploring the deeper implications of systemic control. This reduction of engagement into surface-level interactions helps the system maintain control by preventing meaningful dialogue. Related insight in my document, they fear an informed populace, one that thinks critically and understands the depth of manipulation they are subjected to. This highlights how systems avoid critical engagement, relying instead on superficiality to keep people from questioning the broader structures in place. 22. Promotion of compliance through conditional acceptance. The system encourages people to think that as long as they play along and stay within the lines, they will be accepted and secure. My network's response reflects this conditioning, where individuals are led to believe that compliance ensures belonging and security within social or professional groups. This conditional acceptance pressures people to conform, as deviation risks isolation, even if only on an unspoken level. Related insight in my document, they do not demand loyalty to values or principles, but to rules, codes of conduct that serve no higher purpose than perpetuating their own authority. This captures how systems create a conditional acceptance that prioritizes rule following over true principles, encouraging compliance for acceptance rather than alignment with personal values. 23. Transformation of freedom into selective permission. Transform true freedom into a framework of selective permission, where people act only within pre-approved limits. My network's choice to refrain from posting aligns with this, as they act within what they perceive to be permissible, rather than exercising freedom of expression fully. This selective permission limits true autonomy, keeping actions within a system-determined boundary. Related insight in my document: what they offer is not freedom, but a semblance of it, freedom that exists only so far as it does not challenge their supremacy. This insight captures how the system offers a controlled version of freedom, setting boundaries that make people feel they are exercising choice while actually limiting their autonomy. By controlling the boundaries within which people feel they can act, systems. 24. Amplification of self-policing as an enforcement mechanism. The decision of my network not to engage exemplifies self-policing, where individuals monitor their own behavior to avoid consequences. Self-policing becomes an extension of system control, as individuals enforce system norms upon themselves, relieving the system of the need for direct enforcement. This internalized policing keeps people in line through a combination of fear and self-restraint. Related insight in my document. This is not just about overt control, it's about conditioning us to control ourselves, to censor our own minds before we even begin to question. This captures how systems rely on self-policing, where people limit themselves, embodying system values and norms as if they are their own. 25. Perpetuation of silence as an indicator of legitimacy continued. When individuals choose silence over dissent, the system interprets or projects this silence as implicit approval, strengthening its perceived legitimacy. By not speaking out, my network inadvertently upholds the system's narrative, enabling it to maintain control unchallenged. This silence allows the system to claim broader acceptance, discouraging others from speaking out as they begin to view dissent as rare or abnormal. Related insight in my document: they wield silence as a weapon, filling the gaps of public discourse with their own voice, making us believe that dissent is isolated and consensus universal. This insight reflects how systems transform silence into a false sense of consensus, suggesting that lack of opposition signifies alignment, even if that alignment is merely the result of self-imposed restraint. 26. Dilution of collective courage through individual calculations. My network's individual decisions not to act collectively dilute what could be a united stance. As each person calculates their actions in isolation, rather than as part of a larger movement, systems exploit this by ensuring that individuals feel they bear the full weight of consequences alone, discouraging collective courage. This fragmentation serves to break down what might otherwise be powerful, unified resistance. Related insight in my document: the more they fragment us, the easier we are to control. They know that unity is their greatest threat. This highlights how systems deter collective courage, promoting individualistic calculations that prevent people from realizing the power of coordinated action. 27. Use of unspoken social contracts to inhibit dissent. The reaction from my network suggests an unspoken social contract, where individuals understand that certain topics or positions are off limits in professional or social settings. These implicit agreements discourage challenging systemic issues openly, as people feel a pressure to conform to invisible boundaries of acceptable discourse. These social contracts reinforce the system's control by creating self-imposed limitations without explicit enforcement. Related insight in my document: they create unwritten rules, expectations that keep us within lines we can't see but know are there. This describes how systems establish invisible boundaries that people unconsciously respect, internalizing the limits of discourse and restricting expressions of dissent. 2008. Disincentivization of moral leadership. By opting not to take a stand, individuals in my network reinforce the system's disincentivization of moral leadership. Systems ensure that those who seek to embody ethical integrity face the greatest risks, while those who align passively encounter fewer obstacles. This conditioning discourages people from stepping forward, reducing the pool of genuine moral leaders and allowing the system to prioritize compliance over integrity. Related insight in my document: in a world governed by rules over principles, those who stand by integrity are punished, while those who stay silent are rewarded. This observation captures how systems discourage moral leadership by creating a climate where silence and compliance are safer and often rewarded paths, marginalizing individuals who uphold strong ethical standards. The behavior or manipulation of perceived social norms to sustain control. The behavior of my network highlights how systems manipulate what is seen as normal within social contexts, reinforcing norms that dissuade dissent. When people see others remaining silent, they begin to perceive silence as the expected or normal response and dissent as an aberration. This manipulation of norms keeps individuals in line, as they seek to align with perceived social expectations rather than their personal beliefs. Related insight in my document: they craft a reality where conformity feels natural and questioning feels reckless. This describes how systems create a culture where adherence to norms seems logical, subtly coercing people to align with the majority and view dissent as abnormal. 30. Prevention of organic solidarity among like-minded individuals. By maintaining a culture of silence, systems prevent organic solidarity from forming among those who share similar beliefs or concerns. When people refrain from speaking out, they miss the chance to discover others who agree with them, which could foster unity and strength. This isolation serves to keep individuals fragmented, even when they might find powerful support if they openly connected. Related insight in my document: they thrive on our isolation, knowing that unity breeds strength. This line reflects how systems deliberately fragment potential alliances, keeping like-minded individuals separated and isolated by discouraging open communication that could lead to solidarity. 31. Reinforcement of fear as a social virtue. The reluctance to support my document publicly shows how fear has become not just accepted, but in many cases respected as a form of prudence or professionalism. Systems promote this transformation, framing fear-driven inaction as a responsible choice. This redefinition turns what might have once been seen as cowardice into a respected form of caution, ensuring that people prioritize self-protection over standing with others. Related insight in my document: they sell us fear disguised as wisdom, encouraging us to shrink our horizons and limit our courage. This highlights how systems promote fear as a virtue, making people view self-limiting behaviors as wise or prudent, while discouraging boldness and conviction. 32. Strategic obfuscation of individual and collective power. The choice by individuals in my network to avoid public support reveals how systems strategically obscure the potential power of collective action. By keeping people isolated in their responses, systems prevent individuals from recognizing their combined influence. This obfuscation ensures that people feel individually powerless, unaware of the potential strength in unity. Related insight in my document: they want us to forget that together, our voices carry the weight they fear most. This observation speaks to how systems hide the potential impact of collective power, convincing people that their individual actions are inconsequential to discourage unity. 33. Cultivation of a self-sustaining cycle of conformity and isolation. When people conform out of fear, they contribute to a cycle that reinforces both conformity and isolation. This cycle becomes self-sustaining, as each instance of non-engagement further entrenches social norms of silence and compliance. The system capitalizes on this self-perpetuating mechanism, where fear-based conformity discourages future dissent and makes isolation a consistent experience for those who dissent. Related insight in my document: Their control isn't maintained by force alone, but by the endless reinforcement of our own hesitation. This captures how systems rely on individuals to perpetuate their own control, where each act of conformity deepens the cycle, sustaining the status quo through collective inaction. 34. Subversion of identity through silent compliance. Silent compliance subverts the true identity and beliefs of individuals, aligning them more closely with the system than with their own convictions. This quiet alignment gradually shifts self-identity, making people more likely to think and act in ways that serve the system over time. By avoiding public support, individuals begin to adopt the system's values passively, leading to an erosion of authentic identity. Related insight in my document: they shape our identities not through mandates but through subtle nudges, reshaping us from within until we resemble what they wish us to become. This insight illustrates how silent compliance can gradually transform individuals' identities, making them more aligned with system expectations than with their true values. 35. Engendering passive approval through non-action. Non-action serves as a form of passive approval, where individuals who refrain from dissent appear to endorse the system's norms by default. This passive approval bolsters the system's authority, as silence implies acceptance, making dissent appear isolated or marginal. Systems rely on this passive approval to sustain power without needing explicit endorsements. Related insight in my document: every moment of silence, every act of passivity becomes their approval, a signal that their authority is unchallenged. This statement reflects how systems rely on non-action to convey tacit approval, making silence as valuable as open support and reinforcing control. 36. Psychological divide between public persona and private beliefs. The reluctance to act publicly creates a psychological divide where individuals feel compelled to maintain a safe public persona that may conflict with their private beliefs. This divide keeps people from expressing their true selves and fosters an internal dissonance, where personal identity is sacrificed for public conformity. Systems encourage this split, making people feel they must hide aspects of themselves to fit societal expectations. Related insight in my document: they don't demand loyalty to principles, only to appearances, creating a world where we are fractured from ourselves. This captures how systems cultivate a split between public persona and personal beliefs, enforcing a form of conformity that prevents authentic self-expression. 37. Subtle reprogramming of social and moral expectations. By deterring open support for dissenting ideas, systems reprogram social and moral expectations subtly over time. People begin to recalibrate their understanding of right and wrong based on what is seen as socially or professionally acceptable, often overriding deeper moral convictions. This reprogramming shapes values gradually, making people more aligned with the system's expectations than with intrinsic ethics. Related insight in my document: they alter not just what we do, but how we think, reprogramming our minds to accept what once we would have condemned. This insight emphasizes the system's ability to shift moral and social standards, reprogramming individuals' ethical compasses to align with systemic values rather than personal convictions. 38. Preventing the formation of counter-narratives through discouraged dissent. The choice to avoid sharing my document contributes to a lack of visible counter-narratives that could challenge the system's version of reality. By suppressing alternative views, the system minimizes the potential for dissenting narratives to gain traction, making it easier to maintain a dominant singular narrative that aligns with its goals. 39. Creation of social alienation through divergent values and actions. The system promotes alienation by creating a divide between individuals' values and actions. When people feel compelled to act contrary to their beliefs, it fosters internal alienation, where they become disconnected from their values. This alienation makes it easier for the system to control behavior, as individuals find themselves out of alignment with their own principles, making them more susceptible to further influence. 40. Internalization of compliance as a form of professionalism. The system frames compliance as synonymous with professionalism. leading individuals to believe that avoiding contentious topics is a sign of maturity or competence. This association leads people to self-censor in professional settings, ensuring that they act within boundaries deemed appropriate, reinforcing systemic norms that deter dissent. 41. Perpetuation of institutional loyalty over personal integrity. By discouraging open support for alternative views, systems cultivate institutional loyalty over personal integrity, encouraging individuals to prioritize their alignment with system values over their own. This loyalty is cultivated subtly, as individuals fear repercussions for actions that might jeopardize their standing within institutional frameworks, even if those actions align with their personal ethics. 42. Promotion of apathy as a socially acceptable default response. The system promotes apathy as an acceptable response to controversial or challenging topics. This normalization of apathy makes people feel justified in ignoring issues that might otherwise require moral engagement, reducing the likelihood of collective action. Apathy becomes an unspoken norm, subtly encouraged by systemic conditioning that rewards passivity. 43. Imposition of hierarchical constraints on dissent. Systems create hierarchical constraints that make dissent more challenging depending on one's social or professional position. Individuals often refrain from challenging the status quo because they perceive themselves as having limited influence or fear repercussions that those in higher positions might avoid. This constraint creates a tiered structure where only the least vulnerable feel empowered to dissent. 44. Stifling of cultural evolution through standardized norms. By enforcing conformity, systems stifle cultural evolution, preventing the organic development of new ideas and values that might emerge from dissent. Standardized norms limit creativity and innovation, ensuring that the cultural landscape remains aligned with system-prescribed values, discouraging any change that might arise from diversity of thought. 45. Minimization of personal responsibility through collective avoidance. The system encourages collective avoidance, where individuals assume that others will take responsibility, diluting personal accountability. This diffusion of responsibility reduces the sense of individual obligation to act, ensuring that each person feels less pressure to stand up as they believe others will. 46. Utilization of social surveillance to reinforce compliance. Social surveillance, where individuals monitor each other's actions, reinforces compliance. People refrain from dissent to avoid social judgment or potential professional fallout. This form of mutual observation makes self-censorship more pervasive, as individuals feel they are always under scrutiny. 47. Normalization of passive endorsement as an expression of loyalty. By not speaking out, individuals inadvertently endorse the system passively, reinforcing an expectation of loyalty through inaction. This passive endorsement is normalized, making silence a socially acceptable way to demonstrate loyalty without requiring active support for the system, subtly binding individuals to its authority. 48. Promotion of intellectual apathy as a means of control. The system fosters intellectual apathy by discouraging deep engagement with controversial issues. By making people feel that certain topics are too complex or not worth the trouble, it reduces the likelihood of critical thinking, keeping people within a shallow understanding of issues, which reduces their capacity for meaningful resistance. 49. Strategic fragmentation of dissent through targeted isolation. The system targets individuals who dissent, isolating them strategically to prevent collective resistance. This targeted isolation creates a perception that dissenters are outliers, dissuading others from joining or supporting their cause, and ensuring that potential movements never gain momentum. 50. Suppression of the idea of moral obligation in favor of relativism. Systems downplay the concept of moral obligation, promoting a relativistic approach that makes people question the necessity of standing for specific principles. This relativism encourages a mindset where individuals feel justified in ignoring moral imperatives, choosing instead to align with situational ethics that support system-prescribed norms. 51. Production of civic participation through disengagement from public issues. By fostering disengagement from public issues, systems reduce civic participation, making it less likely that individuals will advocate for change. This disengagement makes people more susceptible to the influence of centralized power as they feel distance from civic duties and responsibilities. 52. Redefinition of free expression to fit within approved parameters. Systems redefine free expression to exist only within system-approved parameters, making individuals believe they are free while limiting the scope of permissible discourse. This restricted version of free expression conditions individuals to self-regulate, avoiding topics that fall outside system-prescribed boundaries. 53. Cultivation of a socially reinforced consensus against dissent. Through social conditioning, systems cultivate a consensus that discourages dissent, making people feel isolated if they hold divergent views. This socially reinforced consensus creates pressure to conform, ensuring that individuals who might otherwise support dissent feel compelled to align with majority attitudes. 54. Fostering of a false dichotomy between security and freedom. Systems promote the idea that individuals must choose between security and freedom, discouraging dissent under the guise of maintaining order. This false dichotomy makes people believe that supporting the system is necessary for their protection, leading them to compromise on freedom in favor of perceived security. 55. Deterrence of collective awareness through individual distractions. The system uses distractions, both social and personal, to keep individuals from becoming collectively aware of their shared interests or goals. By encouraging people to focus on individual priorities, the system prevents collective realization and action that could challenge its authority. 56. Promotion of image management over authentic engagement. Individuals are encouraged to manage their public image rather than engage authentically, fostering a culture of surface-level interaction over substantive discussion. This emphasis on image management aligns with system goals by keeping discourse superficial and discouraging genuine engagement with controversial issues. 57. Construction of self-censorship as an inherent social virtue. The system promotes self-censorship as a virtue, conditioning individuals to see restraint in expression as inherently responsible. This framing makes people feel that withholding their views is an admirable quality, aligning with the system's desire for limited dissent. 58. Stigmatization of nonconformity as an act of recklessness. Systems stigmatize nonconformity, portraying it as recklessness rather than courage, which discourages individuals from challenging norms. This framing makes dissent appear irresponsible, reinforcing the expectation of conformity as a sign of social and professional maturity. 59. Undermining of critical discourse through erosion of curiosity. Systems discourage curiosity by conditioning individuals to avoid controversial topics, reducing their engagement with ideas that might inspire dissent. This erosion of curiosity minimizes critical discourse, keeping people disinterested in exploring alternative perspectives. 60. Perpetuation of systemic control through suppression of collective memory. The system suppresses collective memory by discouraging individuals from recalling past instances of dissent or resistance. This suppression weakens the continuity of resistance, ensuring that each instance of dissent feels isolated rather than part of a larger tradition of challenging authority. 61. Creation of a cycle of conditional loyalty and controlled dissent. Systems foster a cycle of loyalty where individuals feel permitted to dissent only within controlled limits. This cycle reinforces loyalty by allowing conditional dissent, which serves as a release valve while maintaining overall compliance with system expectations. 62. Transformation of silence into a default mechanism of endorsement. The system transforms silence into an assumed endorsement, where individuals who refrain from dissent are seen as supportive by default. This silent endorsement reinforces the system's authority, as non-engagement is interpreted as agreement or acquiescence. 63. Redirection of energy from advocacy to personal survival. By making dissent appear risky, systems redirect individuals' energy toward personal survival over advocacy, discouraging engagement with causes that could challenge the system. This redirection prioritizes self-preservation over collective action, making it less likely that individuals will mobilize for systemic change. 64. Promotion of fragmented identity to discourage unified action. Systems encourage fragmented identities, making individuals compartmentalize personal beliefs from public behavior. This fragmentation discourages unified action, as people become accustomed to separating their public personas from their true values, weakening their ability to take principled stands. 65. Normalization of pessimism as a justification for inaction. By fostering a sense of pessimism about the effectiveness of dissent, systems encourage individuals to remain inactive. This normalization of pessimism makes resistance feel futile, reinforcing a culture where people justify inaction by believing that change is impossible. 66. Subtle conditioning to prioritize careerism over principle. The system conditions individuals to prioritize career advancement over personal principles, making them less likely to risk professional standing by dissenting. This careerism aligns personal goals with system preservation, as individuals focus on advancement within system parameters over challenging injustice. The system's emphasis on careerism discourages people from taking moral stands that could jeopardize their advancement. By tying personal success to conformity, IT conditions individuals to compromise on principles, creating a professional culture where success aligns with compliance over integrity. 67. Encouragement of short-term thinking to avoid long-term resistance. Systems encourage short-term thinking by conditioning people to focus on immediate consequences rather than the long-term impact of their actions. This mindset discourages resistance, as individuals are more likely to prioritize avoiding short-term discomfort over challenging the system's broader influence. 68. Manipulation of fear to normalize submissive behavior. The system leverages fear to normalize submissive behavior, making individuals see caution and self-restraint as virtues. This manipulation discourages assertiveness and instills a mindset that equates compliance with safety, ensuring that dissent remains minimal. 69. Reduction of dissent through social pressure to maintain harmony. The system uses social pressure to enforce a facade of harmony, making dissent appear disruptive or harmful to group cohesion. By framing dissent as socially undesirable, it discourages individuals from speaking out, as they fear being perceived as divisive. 70. Fostering dependency on institutional approval for validation. Systems encourage individuals to seek validation through institutional approval, making them dependent on system-defined metrics for self-worth. This dependency discourages actions that might jeopardize their standing within the institution, as they prioritize external approval over personal conviction. 71. Substitution of real dialogue with surface-level affirmations. The system replaces genuine dialogue with surface-level affirmations, creating a culture where complex discussions are avoided in favor of simplistic agreement. This substitution reduces critical engagement and ensures that individuals are less likely to explore challenging ideas that could lead to dissent. 72. Encouragement of incremental compromises to weaken resolve. By encouraging individuals to make small compromises over time, the system gradually erodes their resolve. These incremental compromises make it easier for people to conform to larger demands later, as each step conditions them to accept more significant concessions. 73. Discouragement of intellectual autonomy to maintain systemic control. Systems discourage intellectual autonomy by promoting reliance on system-approved narratives. This discouragement ensures that individuals are less likely to explore independent perspectives, keeping their understanding aligned with the system's framing. 74. Reinforcement of passivity as a culturally acceptable response. The system cultivates passivity as a culturally acceptable response to complex issues, making people feel that non-engagement is a reasonable approach. This cultural norm discourages active involvement, leading to a population that passively accepts the system's decisions. 75. Suppression of collective empowerment through fragmented awareness. By preventing individuals from understanding the broader impact of their actions, the system keeps them from realizing their collective power. Fragmented awareness ensures that people remain isolated in their perspectives, reducing the likelihood of unified, empowered resistance. 76. Normalization of fear of repercussions as justified inaction. The system normalizes fear of repercussions, making individuals feel that their inaction is justified. This normalization reinforces a risk-averse culture, where people view avoidance of conflict as sensible, ultimately preventing them from challenging the system. 77. Encouragement of conditional values aligned with system norms. The system promotes conditional values that align with its norms, subtly encouraging people to adjust their principles to fit acceptable boundaries. This conditioning leads individuals to adopt values that do not conflict with the system, ensuring compliance even at a moral level. 78. Cultivation of a cynical outlook to discourage change. Systems foster cynicism, making people believe that change is futile. This cultivated cynicism reduces motivation to act, as individuals are conditioned to think that their efforts are unlikely to make a difference. 79. Erosion of trust in collective action through social isolation. By encouraging social isolation, the system erodes trust in collective action. Individuals become more skeptical of collaborative efforts, feeling that they are more vulnerable when standing alone, which discourages them from joining forces with others. 80. Discouragement of empathy through individualistic focus. The system discourages empathy by promoting an individualistic focus, making people less likely to consider the impact of their actions on others. This self-centered perspective prevents solidarity, as individuals prioritize their own security over collective well-being. 81. Replacement of ethical standards with compliance-based expectations. Systems replace ethical standards with compliance-based expectations, redefining morality in terms of adherence to rules rather than alignment with personal integrity. This shift discourages individuals from making principled stands as they come to see rule following as the highest standard. 82. Promotion of system-approved heroes to discourage genuine dissent. The system promotes certain figures as acceptable role models who demonstrate compliance while appearing virtuous. This tactic discourages genuine dissent, as individuals are subtly guided to emulate system-approved behaviors rather than independent principles. 83. Reduction of resilience by conditioning avoidance of conflict. By discouraging conflict, the system reduces resilience, conditioning individuals to avoid confrontation even in minor situations. This avoidance strategy creates a population that is less likely to confront challenges, reinforcing a culture of compliance. 84. Fostering of dependency on authority figures for guidance. Systems foster dependency on authority figures, discouraging individuals from relying on their own judgment. This dependency ensures that people are less likely to question system directives as they become accustomed to looking for approval from higher-ups. 85. Encouragement of indifference to injustice as a coping mechanism. The system encourages indifference to injustice, making it a socially acceptable coping mechanism. By normalizing this attitude, it conditions individuals to ignore systemic issues, reducing the likelihood of organized resistance against perceived wrongs. 86. Framing of silence as wisdom to discourage expression. The system frames silence as wisdom, conditioning individuals to see self-restraint as a sign of maturity. This framing discourages people from expressing themselves openly, as they are led to believe that silence is the mark of a wise individual. 87. Replacement of personal responsibility with group compliance. Systems replace personal responsibility with group compliance, encouraging individuals to act in alignment with group norms rather than personal convictions. This replacement discourages moral agency, making individuals prioritize group acceptance over individual accountability. 88. Conditioning of individuals to view non-involvement as neutrality. The system conditions people to view non-involvement as neutrality, even when it implicitly supports the status quo. This conditioning reduces personal accountability, making people feel that by staying uninvolved, they are taking a neutral stance rather than enabling systemic issues. 89. Cultivation of distrust in alternative narratives. Systems cultivate distrust in alternative narratives, framing them as fringe or unreliable. This distrust prevents individuals from engaging with dissenting perspectives, reinforcing a monoculture of thought aligned with the system's narrative. 90. Encouragement of self-interest over collective good. The system promotes self-interest as a priority, discouraging individuals from considering the collective good. This focus on self-preservation ensures that people are less likely to support causes that challenge the system as they prioritize personal over collective outcomes. 91. Fostering of fragmented communities to prevent unified resistance. By fostering fragmented communities, systems prevent unified resistance. This fragmentation keeps individuals from connecting over shared concerns, making it difficult to build a cohesive movement against systemic issues. 92. Minimization of critical thinking through simplistic narratives. Systems minimize critical thinking by promoting simplistic narratives that discourage deeper analysis. This approach keeps individuals focused on surface-level understanding, preventing them from questioning complex systemic structures. 93. Normalization of compliance as a survival mechanism. The system normalizes compliance as essential for survival, making individuals feel that dissent could jeopardize their stability. This normalization encourages people to prioritize security over freedom, reinforcing compliance as a means of self-preservation. 94. Promotion of passivity as a form of psychological safety. Systems promote passivity as a form of psychological safety, encouraging people to avoid engagement as a means of protecting their well-being. This promotion reinforces inaction, creating a culture where avoidance of involvement is seen as a legitimate means of maintaining peace. 95. Cultivation of social dependence on established authority. The system fosters social dependence on established authority, making individuals more likely to align with institutional perspectives. This dependence discourages them from considering alternative viewpoints, ensuring conformity with system-approved narratives. 96. Reduction of personal agency through external validation. Systems reduce personal agency by encouraging individuals to seek validation from external sources. This reliance on external approval diminishes self-confidence in personal decisions, making individuals more susceptible to influence from system-aligned viewpoints. 97. Suppression of long-term vision through focus on immediate needs. The system discourages long-term vision by focusing individuals on immediate needs. This short-sightedness prevents people from considering the broader implications of their actions, ensuring that they remain aligned with short-term goals that serve the system. 98. Encouragement of passive compliance as a social norm. Systems encourage passive compliance as a default social norm, making it a societal expectation. This normalization of passive behavior reduces the likelihood of active engagement, fostering a culture where people avoid involvement to maintain social acceptance. 99. Discouragement of questioning through fear of alienation. The system discourages questioning by instilling a fear of alienation, making individuals believe that challenging norms may result in social or professional isolation. This fear of alienation prevents people from exploring alternative perspectives, reinforcing a culture of conformity where dissent is perceived as a threat to belonging. 100%. Normalization of silence as a virtue in professional settings. The system normalizes silence as a virtue, especially in professional settings, where individuals are encouraged to avoid controversial topics to maintain a professional demeanor. This expectation limits open dialogue, ensuring that professional environments remain aligned with system-prescribed norms. 101. Discouragement of collective responsibility in favor of individual survival. The system discourages collective responsibility by promoting individual survival as a priority. By framing self-preservation as essential, it prevents individuals from feeling obligated to support broader causes, which weakens the potential for unified action against systemic issues. 102. Subtle conditioning to accept authority without scrutiny. Systems subtly condition people to accept authority without critical scrutiny. This conditioning encourages a blind trust in institutional power, discouraging individuals from questioning directives and ensuring compliance with authority figures or established institutions. 103. Framing of non-compliance as a risk to personal reputation. The system frames non-compliance as a threat to personal reputation, making people feel that dissenting could harm their social or professional standing. This framing leverages reputational risk to enforce conformity, as individuals prioritize maintaining their image over expressing their beliefs. 104. Promotion of surface-level relationships over authentic connections. Systems promote surface-level relationships that avoid deep discussions on important issues, creating a culture where people are hesitant to engage authentically. These superficial connections prevent the formation of supportive networks that might encourage people to act in alignment with their values. 105. Discouragement of intellectual curiosity to avoid dissenting perspectives. The system discourages intellectual curiosity, especially toward dissenting viewpoints, by framing certain topics as unnecessary or overly complex. This discouragement keeps individuals from exploring ideas that might lead to alternative conclusions, reinforcing system-aligned beliefs. 106. Creation of a controlled perception of stability through compliance. Systems create a controlled perception of stability where compliance is associated with order and dissent with chaos. This perception encourages individuals to believe that conformity maintains societal harmony, deterring them from supporting actions that might disrupt the status quo. 107. Conditioning to equate silence with wisdom and restraint. The system conditions people to equate silence with wisdom, framing restraint in expression as a mark of maturity. This conditioning ensures that individuals view open disagreement as impulsive, making them more likely to self-censor in the name of appearing rational. 108. Reinforcement of conformity as a moral obligation. Systems reinforce conformity as a moral obligation, framing adherence to social norms as a duty to society. This framing discourages individuals from challenging the system, as they feel morally compelled to comply with the majority perspective. 109. Promotion of social amnesia to undermine historical context of dissent. The system promotes social amnesia, making it difficult for people to recall historical contexts where dissent was necessary. This lack of historical perspective prevents individuals from drawing parallels to past injustices, reducing the likelihood that they will recognize the need for resistance in the present. 110. Encouragement of perceived powerlessness to prevent action. Systems encourage a sense of powerlessness, making individuals feel that they cannot affect change. This perception prevents people from attempting to make a difference, as they internalize the belief that their efforts are insignificant. 111. Fostering of a culture of compliance through rewards and punishments. The system fosters a culture of compliance by using rewards and punishments to reinforce desired behaviors. This conditioning makes people more likely to conform in pursuit of rewards or out of fear of consequences, keeping them aligned with system goals. 112. Promotion of relativism to undermine absolute values. Systems promote relativism, making people question absolute values. By encouraging individuals to view ethics as subjective, the system weakens moral standards that might drive people to challenge injustices. Reinforcing an environment where compliance is easier than standing by principled convictions. 113. Stigmatization of advocacy as social disruption. The system stigmatizes advocacy, framing it as disruptive rather than constructive. This framing makes people reluctant to advocate for change, as they fear being labeled as agitators or disruptors, discouraging them from taking active roles in pushing for reform. 114. Normalization of apathy toward systemic issues as realism. Systems normalize apathy toward systemic issues by framing it as realism, making people believe that engaging with such issues is futile or naive. This normalization reduces the drive to act, as individuals come to see inaction as a rational response. 115. Inhibition of independent thinking through group identity reinforcement. The system inhibits independent thinking by reinforcing group identities, making individuals feel that their loyalty lies with the group rather than their personal beliefs. This group identity discourages critical thought that might lead to actions outside system-prescribed boundaries. 116. Conditioning of people to avoid controversy for social cohesion. Systems condition individuals to avoid controversy under the guise of maintaining social cohesion. This conditioning discourages people from engaging with contentious topics, reinforcing a culture of compliance where the system's narratives remain unchallenged. 117. Redefinition of success to align with system compliance. The system redefines success to align with compliance, making individuals feel that adhering to system norms is a pathway to achievement. This redefinition shifts priorities, leading people to view conformity as essential to personal and professional success. 118. Encouragement of silence as a tool for emotional safety. The system encourages silence as a tool for emotional safety, making people believe that withholding their views protects their peace of mind. This encouragement discourages open discussion, creating a culture where difficult conversations are avoided to maintain emotional comfort. 119. Undermining of social bonds that foster collective action. By promoting superficial connections, the system undermines social bonds that could lead to collective action. This weakening of genuine relationships reduces trust among individuals, making them less likely to unite in challenging the system. 120. Cultivation of distraction to divert attention from systemic issues. Systems cultivate distractions that keep people focused on trivial matters rather than systemic issues. This diversion ensures that individuals remain disengaged from the complexities of systemic control, reducing the likelihood of organized resistance. 121. Encouragement of social isolation to prevent collective resilience. The system encourages social isolation, discouraging the formation of resilient networks. This isolation makes individuals feel alone in their concerns, reducing their willingness to take risks that might challenge the system's power. 122. Normalization of self-censorship as emotional intelligence. The system normalizes self-censorship as a mark of emotional intelligence, making people feel that withholding their opinions demonstrates maturity. This normalization discourages individuals from sharing dissenting views, as they are conditioned to see silence as a virtue. 123. Suppression of ethical inquiry to prevent moral clarity. Systems suppress ethical inquiry by encouraging a focus on surface-level goals, preventing individuals from developing moral clarity. This suppression ensures that people remain aligned with the system's priorities, limiting their engagement with deeper ethical questions. 124. Reinforcement of conformity as social responsibility. The system frames conformity as a social responsibility, making people feel that adhering to norms is part of their duty to others. This framing discourages dissent, as individuals prioritize perceived social harmony over their own beliefs. 125. Inhibition of dissent through the fear of professional repercussions. The system inhibits dissent by making individuals fear professional repercussions. This fear discourages people from expressing views that could be seen as challenging the system, as they prioritize career security over honesty. 126. Cultivation of distrust in independent thought is unreliable. Systems cultivate distrust in independent thought, framing it as unreliable or dangerous. This conditioning makes people more likely to accept system-approved narratives, reducing the likelihood of critical questioning. 127. Encouragement of superficiality as a social norm. The system encourages superficiality as a social norm, making people feel that deep discussions are unnecessary or burdensome. This encouragement ensures that individuals avoid meaningful engagement, limiting the spread of ideas that might challenge the system. 128. Minimization of personal influence through social conformity. Systems minimize personal influence by promoting social conformity, making individuals feel that they cannot make a difference. This perception discourages personal action, as people come to believe that conformity is the most impactful response. 129. Reinforcement of compliance through perceived safety. The system reinforces compliance by associating it with safety, making individuals feel that adhering to norms protects them. This perception discourages risk-taking, as people view conformity as essential to their well-being. 130. Promotion of systemic dependence as a form of security. The system promotes dependence on its structures as a means of security, encouraging individuals to rely on system-provided solutions rather than their own judgment. This dependence keeps people aligned with systemic expectations, reducing the likelihood of questioning or independent action. 131. Redefinition of courage as recklessness to discourage dissent. Systems redefine courage as recklessness, portraying bold actions or dissenting voices as impulsive or dangerous. This redefinition discourages individuals from acting on their convictions, as they are conditioned to view caution as maturity and bravery as imprudence. 132. Normalization of self-interest over community well-being. The system normalizes self-interest by framing individual success as the highest priority, discouraging people from actions that prioritize community well-being. This focus on self-interest minimizes collective action, as individuals feel justified in putting personal safety and advancement above social or moral responsibilities. 133. Encouragement of passive observance as a social expectation. Systems encourage passive observance of social issues, creating a culture where watching events unfold from the sidelines is normalized. This expectation discourages engagement, as people are conditioned to believe that merely observing is an acceptable and sufficient response. 134. Conditioning individuals to avoid topics that challenge social norms. The system conditions individuals to avoid topics that challenge social norms, framing such discussions as divisive or disruptive. This conditioning discourages people from bringing up alternative perspectives, ensuring that discourse remains within boundaries that align with the system's interests. 135. Promotion of limited exposure to ideas as intellectual moderation. Systems promote limited exposure to diverse ideas, portraying this as intellectual moderation or balance. This restriction keeps people within a controlled range of perspectives, preventing them from encountering viewpoints that might inspire dissent or broader critical thinking. 136. Undermining of collective action through encouragement of individualism. By encouraging individualism, the system undermines the concept of collective action, making people feel that they are better off addressing issues on their own. This emphasis on individualism prevents the formation of strong alliances that could mount organized resistance to systemic control. 137. Redefinition of activism as extremism to discourage engagement. Systems redefine activism as extremism, framing those who seek change as radicals or agitators. This redefinition discourages people from engaging in activist efforts, as they fear being associated with labels that might harm their reputation or professional standing. 138. Normalization of conformity as pragmatic realism. The system normalizes conformity by framing it as pragmatic or realistic, making people feel that aligning with the status quo is sensible. This framing discourages idealistic actions, as individuals come to see any deviation from system norms as impractical or naive. 139. Promotion of controlled outrage as a substitute for action. Systems promote controlled outrage on safe topics to divert energy from actionable dissent. This strategy allows individuals to feel that they are expressing dissatisfaction without challenging systemic issues, keeping their focus on harmless issues while the system's core remains unchallenged. 140. Encouragement of short-term gains over long-term principles. The system encourages individuals to prioritize short-term gains over long-term principles, framing immediate benefits as more valuable than sustained ethical commitments. This focus on short-term thinking keeps individuals aligned with system norms that prioritize immediate compliance over lasting integrity. 141. Suppression of cultural memory of resistance to prevent rebellion. Systems suppress cultural memory of past resistance, making it harder for people to draw inspiration from historical examples of dissent. This erasure prevents individuals from recognizing the long-standing tradition of challenging injustice, keeping them isolated in their actions. 142. Minimization of diverse voices to create a perceived consensus. The system minimizes diverse voices, creating an illusion of consensus that discourages dissent. By promoting a narrow range of perspectives, IT conditions individuals to believe that most people agree with system values, reducing the likelihood of questioning or resistance. 143. Promotion of image over substance in social and professional arenas. Systems promote image over substance, encouraging individuals to prioritize appearances rather than genuine convictions. This emphasis on superficial presentation discourages people from taking meaningful action, as they focus on maintaining a favorable image instead. 144. Encouragement of selective morality aligned with system interests. The system promotes selective morality, where individuals are encouraged to uphold values that align with system interests. This conditioning allows people to feel morally consistent while selectively applying ethics in ways that reinforce systemic control. 145. Stigmatization of intellectual depth as overly critical. Systems stigmatize intellectual depth, portraying in-depth analysis as overly critical or unnecessary. This discouragement keeps people from examining issues thoroughly, limiting their understanding to surface-level interpretations that align with system-prescribed narratives. 146. Reinforcement of social conformity as part of civic duty. The system reinforces social conformity as a form of civic duty, encouraging individuals to see compliance as contributing to the common good. This framing discourages actions that might challenge the status quo, as individuals feel that maintaining harmony is part of their societal role. 147. Promotion of fear-based rationalizations for inaction. Systems encourage fear-based rationalizations, making individuals justify inaction as a practical response to perceived risks. This promotion of fear discourages people from confronting systemic issues as they rationalize avoidance as necessary self-protection. 148. Substitution of genuine leadership with system-aligned figures. The system promotes figures who appear as leaders but are aligned with system goals, providing role models that discourage genuine resistance. This substitution steers people toward compliant figures, diverting support away from those who might inspire true change. 149. Conditioning of cynicism as a defense against disappointment. Systems condition individuals to adopt cynicism, framing it as a protective response to disappointment. This mindset discourages optimism and engagement, making people feel that action is futile and that accepting the status quo is the best option. 150. Minimization of dissent as a means of maintaining order. The system minimizes dissent by framing it as a threat to order, encouraging individuals to view resistance as disruptive. This framing makes people more likely to avoid challenging the system as they prioritize stability over potential change. 151. Encouragement of social ambiguity to avoid clear commitments. Systems encourage social ambiguity, where individuals avoid taking clear stances on important issues. This encouragement fosters a culture of vague commitments, allowing people to feel engaged without truly challenging the system's norms. 152. Stigmatization of ethical consistency as rigidity. The system stigmatizes ethical consistency, portraying it as rigidity or inflexibility. This stigma discourages individuals from adhering strictly to their values, as they are conditioned to view flexibility as more socially acceptable. 153. Promotion of safe topics to distract from systemic issues. Systems promote discussion of safe, non-controversial topics to divert attention from deeper systemic issues. This distraction ensures that people remain engaged with trivial matters, keeping them from exploring topics that might lead to dissent. 154. Framing of non-engagement as a rational choice. The system frames non-engagement as rational, making individuals feel that staying out of contentious issues is a sound decision. This framing discourages involvement, creating a culture where passivity is seen as intelligent rather than complacent. 155. Reinforcement of limited visibility for alternative perspectives. Systems reinforce limited visibility for alternative perspectives, ensuring that dissenting views remain on the periphery. This limitation creates a controlled environment where only system-approved narratives gain widespread attention. 156. Cultivation of fear of being misunderstood to deter expression. The system cultivates a fear of being misunderstood, making individuals hesitant to express dissenting views. This fear discourages open dialogue, as people prefer silence to the risk of misinterpretation or conflict. 157. Encouragement of moral flexibility for social acceptance. Systems encourage moral flexibility, making individuals feel that adapting their principles to fit social expectations is necessary for acceptance. This flexibility discourages firm stances on ethical issues, as people prioritize fitting in over staying true to their values. 158. Subtle redirection of individual purpose towards systemic goals. Systemic interests. This redirection keeps individuals focused on goals that serve the system, reducing the likelihood that they will pursue actions that challenge it. The system subtly redirects individual purpose, aligning personal goals with. 159. Suppression of historical examples of successful resistance. Systems suppress historical examples of successful resistance to prevent inspiration from past victories. By limiting knowledge of these events, they reduce the motivation for individuals to believe that organized dissent can create meaningful change. 160. Encouragement of passive participation as a social norm. The system encourages passive participation, where individuals feel they are contributing simply by being present. This normalization of passivity discourages active engagement, making people feel that non-engagement is still a form of involvement. 161. Promotion of skepticism toward unofficial information sources. Systems promote skepticism toward unofficial information sources, making individuals distrustful of alternative narratives. This skepticism keeps people aligned with system-approved information, reducing openness to perspectives that might foster critical thinking. 162. Framing of dissidence as an unnecessary burden. The system frames dissidence as an unnecessary burden, making individuals feel that challenging the status quo is a waste of effort. This framing discourages engagement, as people view resistance as an impractical diversion from more practical manners. By framing dissidence as an unnecessary burden, the system discourages individuals from taking actions that would challenge its control. This perception of resistance as impractical or wasteful leads people to prioritize routine activities over actions that could foster meaningful change, ensuring the system's stability. 163. Normalization of deferring ethical decisions to authorities. Systems encourage individuals to defer ethical decisions to authority figures, subtly discouraging personal accountability. This normalization makes people feel that their role is simply to follow established guidelines, reducing the likelihood that they will question or act against directives they perceive as unjust. 164. Encouragement of inaction through rationalization of complexity. The system rationalizes complex issues as too difficult for individual action, discouraging people from attempting to address systemic problems. By framing issues as too vast to influence, it conditions individuals to believe that meaningful engagement is futile, thus justifying inaction. 165. Substitution of personal integrity with conformity-based identity. Systems promote a conformity-based identity that prioritizes alignment with norms over personal integrity. This substitution ensures that people seek validation through adherence to system expectations rather than staying true to their core values, fostering a culture of passive compliance. 166. Discouragement of long-term ethical commitments. The system discourages long-term ethical commitments by promoting a flexible situational morality. This approach makes individuals less likely to commit to principles that might require them to confront systemic issues, as they are conditioned to adapt their beliefs to immediate circumstances. 167. Promotion of disengagement from social and political issues. Systems promote disengagement from social and political issues by framing them as divisive or distracting from personal goals. This emphasis on individual priorities keeps people from investing time in causes that challenge the system, reinforcing a culture focused on self-interest over collective responsibility. 168. Subtle redirection of critical focus to harmless issues. The system redirects critical focus toward harmless or inconsequential issues, making individuals feel that they are being critical without challenging any significant aspects of the system. This redirection prevents people from addressing deeper, systemic problems, maintaining control over the direction of critical discourse. 169. Encouragement of pessimism about institutional change. The system fosters pessimism about the possibility of institutional change, discouraging people from advocating for reform. This conditioning leads individuals to believe that efforts to improve systemic issues are pointless, reducing the likelihood of organized resistance or advocacy. 170. Normalization of controlled outlets for expression to prevent discontent. Systems provide controlled outlets for expression, allowing people to voice minor grievances within safe boundaries. This normalization of limited expression prevents genuine discontent from building up, channeling it into system-approved forms that avoid challenging the core structure. 171. Promotion of superficial engagement as a substitute for in-depth analysis. The system encourages superficial engagement, making people feel they are informed without deeply analyzing issues. This emphasis on surface-level understanding ensures that individuals don't question systemic norms critically, keeping their engagement shallow and controlled. 172. Cultivation of dependency on institutional structures for validation. Systems cultivate dependency on institutional structures for personal validation, encouraging people to measure their worth by external standards. This dependency discourages individuals from seeking approval outside system frameworks, making them more likely to conform. 173. Conditioning of fear of isolation as a deterrent to nonconformity. The system conditions individuals to fear isolation, using this fear to deter nonconformity. This conditioning leads people to prioritize belonging over authenticity, making them more likely to adopt system norms to avoid social or professional isolation. 174. Discouragement of curiosity beyond accepted narratives. Systems discourage curiosity that extends beyond accepted narratives, framing such inquiries as unnecessary or disruptive. This discouragement limits the scope of exploration, ensuring that individuals remain within the bounds of system-approved discourse. 175. Encouragement of deference to expert opinion to discourage independent thought. Systems promote deference to expert opinion, discouraging individuals from forming their own perspectives. This reliance on authority figures reduces independent thought, keeping people aligned with system-endorsed views. 176. Promotion of social passivity as a responsible choice. The system promotes social passivity as a responsible choice, making people feel that avoiding engagement with controversial topics is mature and prudent. This framing discourages individuals from exploring complex issues, maintaining a culture where non-involvement is the norm. 177. Substitution of empathy with system-aligned compassion. Systems encourage a form of compassion that aligns with their own goals, replacing true empathy with a controlled version of concern. This substitution limits individuals' ability to relate deeply to those outside system norms, keeping their emotional investment aligned with system interests. 178. Normalization of individualistic achievement over community welfare. The system normalizes individualistic achievement as a primary value, encouraging people to focus on personal success over community welfare. This normalization limits collective solidarity as individuals prioritize personal goals over supporting larger shared causes. 179. Promotion of professional neutrality as a shield against controversy. Systems encourage professional neutrality as a shield against controversy, framing it as essential to maintaining objectivity. This promotion discourages individuals from engaging with issues that might jeopardize their reputation, ensuring that professional environments remain free of dissent. 180. Conditioning of people to accept surface-level solutions. The system conditions individuals to accept surface-level solutions as sufficient responses to complex issues, discouraging deeper analysis. This conditioning minimizes the likelihood that people will question the effectiveness of system approaches, keeping them satisfied with minimal engagement. 181. Encouragement of skepticism toward grassroots movements. Systems encourage skepticism toward grassroots movements, framing them as disorganized or misguided. This skepticism discourages people from supporting independent initiatives, keeping their focus on system-endorsed solutions. 182. Framing of moral certainty as narrow-mindedness. The system frames moral certainty as narrow-mindedness, discouraging individuals from adhering strongly to their values. This framing encourages moral flexibility that aligns with system priorities, reducing the likelihood of principled stands. 183rd. Encouragement of controlled dissent to vent social frustration. Systems permit controlled dissent on specific low-stakes issues, allowing individuals to vent frustration without challenging core structures. This controlled dissent serves as a pressure release, keeping discontent within manageable bounds. 184. Minimization of ethical discourse in favor of pragmatic compliance. The system minimizes ethical discourse, promoting pragmatic compliance as a more sensible approach. This shift discourages individuals from contemplating ethical issues deeply, leading them to prioritize practicality over moral integrity. 185. Normalization of passive compliance as a social default. Systems normalize passive compliance as the default social response, making non-engagement appear as the baseline behavior. This normalization reduces active involvement, creating an environment where compliance is viewed as the easiest and most accepted approach. 186. Promotion of short-term thinking to limit visionary resistance. The system promotes short-term thinking, making it difficult for individuals to consider long-term consequences of compliance. This limitation on visionary thinking keeps people from contemplating the broader impact of their actions, reducing resistance based on future implications. 187. Suppression of in-depth historical analysis to avoid lessons of dissent. Systems suppress in-depth historical analysis that might reveal successful examples of dissent. This suppression ensures that people remain unaware of past victories over oppressive structures, limiting the influence of historical resistance on present actions. 188. Reinforcement of institutional loyalty through dependency on resources. The system reinforces loyalty by making individuals dependent on its resources, discouraging them from questioning authority. This dependency ensures that people feel obligated to remain aligned with system norms to maintain access to essential resources. 189. Substitution of true altruism with system-endorsed acts of service. Systems substitute genuine altruism with acts of service that align with their interests, encouraging individuals to view system-endorsed charity as sufficient. This substitution discourages people from seeking independent ways to make a difference, aligning charitable efforts with systemic control. 190. Normalization of submission as a rational response to complexity. The system normalizes submission by framing it as rational in the face of complex issues. This framing discourages people from questioning authority, as they come to believe that conformity is a sensible response to overwhelming challenges. 191. Discouragement of creative thinking that challenges systemic assumptions. Systems discourage creative thinking that questions foundational assumptions, promoting conformity in thought. This discouragement ensures that innovative ideas, which might undermine systemic control, remain unexplored, keeping individuals aligned with established norms. 192. Framing of passionate advocacy as bias to undermine credibility. The system frames passionate advocacy as bias, casting those who challenge norms with conviction as irrational or partial. This framing undermines the credibility of dissenters, making people hesitant to engage with issues deeply or speak with conviction. 193. Promotion of institutional solutions as the only legitimate forms of change. Systems promote institutional solutions as the only valid avenues for change, discouraging grassroots or independent efforts. This promotion channels energy towards systemic solutions, keeping control over how change is pursued and ensuring it remains within sanctioned boundaries. 194. Normalization of controlled optimism to suppress genuine critique. The system normalizes a controlled form of optimism that discourages critique, making people feel that questioning is overly negative. This approach suppresses genuine critical engagement by framing dissent as counterproductive or overly pessimistic. 195. Encouragement of routine as a substitute for purposeful action. Systems encourage routine behaviors as a way to create a sense of normalcy, substituting true purpose with habitual actions. This conditioning makes individuals less likely to seek meaningful change, as they find comfort in routines that align with system expectations. 196. Cultivation of distrust toward independent thought leaders. The system cultivates distrust toward independent thought leaders, framing them as unreliable or extreme. This distrust keeps individuals aligned with system-endorsed figures, limiting their exposure to alternative perspectives that might challenge systemic narratives. 197. Promotion of pragmatism over idealism to justify compromises. Systems promote pragmatism as a way to justify compromises, making idealism appear unrealistic. This promotion discourages individuals from pursuing high standards of integrity, leading them to make concessions that align with system interests. 198. Conditioning of people to value stability over progress. The system conditions individuals to prioritize stability over progress, framing change as disruptive. This conditioning reduces the drive for innovation or reform, as people prefer the comfort of stability even at the cost of potential improvements. 199. Normalization of passive observation as an adequate response to issues. Systems normalize passive observation, framing it as sufficient engagement with issues. This normalization leads people to believe that awareness alone is impactful, reducing the likelihood that they will take proactive steps toward change. 200. Reinforcement of conformity as a standard for social maturity. The system reinforces conformity as a mark of maturity, making deviation from norms appear immature or impulsive. This reinforcement discourages people from questioning societal expectations as they strive to meet standards that align with system-prescribed behaviors. 201. Encouragement of distrust in collective movements to prevent solidarity. Systems encourage distrust in collective movements, framing them as chaotic or misguided. This discouragement prevents solidarity, as individuals are conditioned to believe that organized efforts are unlikely to bring meaningful results. 202. Substitution of personal fulfillment with system-defined success. The system substitutes true personal fulfillment with a narrow definition of success aligned with its interests. This substitution keeps individuals focused on achievements that reinforce system values rather than exploring goals that may foster independence. 203. Discouragement of historical awareness to prevent comparisons with past oppression. Systems discourage historical awareness that might reveal parallels with past injustices. This discouragement keeps individuals from recognizing patterns of control, reducing the likelihood that they will identify modern parallels and push back. 204. Promotion of public image management as essential to professional success. The system promotes public image management, framing it as key to professional success. This emphasis discourages individuals from expressing potentially controversial views as they prioritize reputation over authenticity. 205. Conditioning of ethical flexibility to align with situational demands. Systems condition individuals to adopt ethical flexibility, adapting their principles to fit immediate circumstances. This conditioning discourages steadfast commitment to values, making people more willing to compromise when it serves the system's needs. 206. Suppression of long-term vision through emphasis on immediate rewards. The system emphasizes immediate rewards over long-term impact, discouraging visionary thinking. This emphasis on the short term keeps people focused on achieving immediate goals, reducing engagement with ideas that might challenge the status quo. 207. Encouragement of moral ambiguity to avoid clear stances. Systems encourage moral ambiguity, making individuals feel that clear stances are simplistic or unrealistic. This ambiguity discourages principled positions, making people more likely to adopt flexible views that align with system norms. 208. Normalization of indifference to injustice as a form of resilience. The system normalizes indifference to injustice, framing it as a way to build resilience. This normalization discourages empathy, as individuals come to see detachment as a strength that prevents engagement with complex social issues. 209. Promotion of reputation over principles as a measure of worth. Systems promote reputation management over adherence to principles, making individuals focus on how they are perceived rather than what they stand for. This promotion discourages authenticity, keeping people aligned with socially acceptable behaviors. 210. Conditioning of compliance is a sign of emotional intelligence. The system conditions compliance as a sign of emotional intelligence, making individuals feel that conforming is an indicator of maturity. This framing encourages people to align with system norms as a way of demonstrating self-control and adaptability. 211. Substitution of collective good with personal achievement metrics. Systems replace a focus on the collective good with personal achievement metrics, encouraging people to prioritize individual success. This substitution discourages actions that benefit society, keeping individuals focused on goals that align with systemic interests. 212. Discouragement of value-based decisions to promote pragmatism. The system discourages value-based decisions, framing them as impractical. This discouragement shifts focus to pragmatism, leading individuals to make choices based on situational convenience rather than core beliefs. 213. Promotion of a superficial understanding of freedom. Systems promote a superficial understanding of freedom, framing it as limited choices within controlled parameters. This understanding discourages people from seeking genuine autonomy, as they come to accept constrained options as sufficient. 214. Normalization of compromise as essential to social acceptance. The system normalizes compromise as essential for social acceptance, discouraging steadfast principles. This normalization leads individuals to adapt their values to fit in, aligning with systemic expectations over personal integrity. 215. Cultivation of fear of consequences to deter independent thought. Systems cultivate fear of consequences for nonconformity, making individuals wary of independent thought. This fear prevents people from exploring ideas outside system norms as they prioritize safety over intellectual freedom. 216. Encouragement of intellectual apathy through focus on entertainment. Systems encourage intellectual apathy by focusing on entertainment, diverting attention from serious issues. This focus discourages critical engagement, as individuals find it easier to prioritize leisure over meaningful discussions. 217. Reinforcement of passive acceptance as a form of social harmony. The system reinforces passive acceptance as a way to maintain social harmony, discouraging individuals from challenging norms. This reinforcement makes conformity appear beneficial to society, aligning personal goals with systemic stability. 218. Promotion of system-aligned morality to replace individual ethics. Systems promote a morality that aligns with their interests, subtly replacing individual ethics with system-prescribed values. This promotion encourages individuals to adopt beliefs that serve system goals, reducing independent moral judgment. 219. Normalization of selective dissent to prevent broad criticism. The system normalizes selective dissent, allowing minor criticisms while discouraging broader challenges. This selective approach channels frustration into manageable areas, preventing it from building into substantial resistance. 220. Cultivation of skepticism toward non-system solutions. Systems cultivate skepticism toward solutions outside their structures, framing them as impractical. This skepticism keeps individuals reliant on system-endorsed approaches, discouraging innovation that might challenge systemic control. 221. Encouragement of ambiguity in personal beliefs to avoid accountability. The system encourages ambiguity in personal beliefs, framing clear stances as limiting. This encouragement leads people to adopt vague positions, reducing the likelihood of accountability to consistent values. 222. Suppression of emotional investment in issues to maintain control. Systems suppress emotional investment in social issues, encouraging detachment as a rational approach. This suppression discourages empathy-driven actions, reducing the motivation to challenge systemic structures. 223. Promotion of controlled adaptability to reinforce compliance. The system promotes adaptability as a virtue, subtly directing individuals to adapt only within controlled parameters. This controlled adaptability keeps people flexible yet compliant, reducing the likelihood of true independence in thought or action. 224. Encouragement of fragmented identities to limit collective strength. Systems encourage fragmented identities where individuals separate personal beliefs from public behavior. This fragmentation prevents unified action as people struggle to integrate their values with their actions, weakening collective resistance. 225. Normalization of disinterest in systemic issues as practicality. The system normalizes disinterest in systemic issues by framing it as practical, encouraging individuals to focus on personal concerns. This discouragement of systemic awareness ensures that people view social or political engagement as a distraction from their own lives. 226. Framing of dissent as self-interest to undermine moral authority. Systems frame dissenters as acting out of self-interest rather than principle, undermining their moral authority. This framing discourages others from supporting dissent, as they are led to view resistance as selfish rather than socially beneficial. 227. Promotion of subdued enthusiasm as a sign of maturity. The system promotes subdued enthusiasm, framing passionate engagement as immature. This framing discourages individuals from expressing strong convictions, leading them to temper their beliefs to fit system expectations of mature behavior. 228. Encouragement of personal branding over authentic expression. Systems encourage individuals to focus on personal branding rather than authentic self-expression. This emphasis on managing perceptions discourages genuine engagement with issues that might disrupt their public image, aligning with system norms. 229. Promotion of tolerance for minor injustices to prevent broader criticism. The system promotes tolerance for minor injustices, framing them as inevitable or trivial. This normalization keeps people from recognizing the cumulative impact of small issues, preventing the escalation of criticism against larger systemic flaws. 230. Conditioning of obedience as a marker of professionalism. Systems condition individuals to view obedience as a core aspect of professionalism. This conditioning discourages independent thought, making compliance with institutional norms seem essential for career success. 231. Suppression of nuanced understanding to favor simplified narratives. The system suppresses nuanced understanding by promoting simplified narratives, making complex issues seem straightforward. This discouragement of depth keeps people from exploring alternative perspectives, reinforcing system-approved interpretations. 232. Framing of non-engagement as an indicator of rationality. Systems frame non-engagement as rational, making it appear as a sensible choice for those who seek to avoid conflict. This framing discourages active involvement in challenging issues, reinforcing a culture where inaction is valued as wisdom. 233. Encouragement of low-risk advocacy to channel dissent safely. The system encourages low-risk forms of advocacy, allowing people to express limited dissatisfaction in ways that do not threaten systemic structures. This controlled advocacy provides a release for frustration, while keeping dissent within manageable limits. 234. Normalization of self-centered goals as socially acceptable. The system normalizes self-centered goals, promoting them as socially acceptable and even admirable. This focus on personal achievement discourages actions that prioritize collective welfare, aligning individual aspirations with system-prescribed values. 235. Discouragement of solidarity to foster individualistic competition. Systems discourage solidarity, promoting individualistic competition as the norm. This discouragement prevents the formation of supportive networks that could lead to collective resistance, keeping individuals isolated in pursuit of personal success. 236. Promotion of intellectual detachment as objectivity. The system promotes intellectual detachment, framing it as objectivity, which discourages emotional engagement with critical issues. This detachment keeps individuals from forming passionate commitments that might drive action against systemic control. 237. Encouragement of skepticism toward activism as idealistic. Systems encourage skepticism toward activism, framing it as idealistic or unrealistic. This framing discourages people from supporting change efforts, making them feel that activism is impractical or naive. 238. Framing of compliance as a path to personal stability. The system frames compliance as essential for achieving personal stability, encouraging people to view adherence to norms as a means of security. This framing discourages dissent, as individuals feel that challenging the system could endanger their well-being. 239. Conditioning of discouragement towards societal engagement as self-care. Systems condition individuals to avoid societal engagement, framing it as a form of self-care. This discouragement makes people feel that distancing themselves from challenging issues is a way to maintain mental well-being, reducing collective involvement. 240. Normalization of fear-based decision-making as wisdom. The system normalizes fear-based decision-making, making cautious inaction appear as a wise choice. This normalization discourages individuals from taking risks, keeping them aligned with system norms and discouraging bold actions. 241. Promotion of controlled optimism to sustain systemic status quo. Systems promote a controlled optimism that avoids critique, keeping people content within existing structures. This optimism prevents deep engagement with systemic flaws, ensuring that people remain supportive of or indifferent to the status quo. 242. Encouragement of silence on controversial issues as prudence. The system encourages silence on controversial issues, framing it as prudence or professionalism. This encouragement discourages open discourse, reinforcing a culture where sensitive topics are avoided to maintain social cohesion. 243. Cultivation of suspicion toward unpopular opinions. Systems cultivate suspicion toward unpopular opinions, framing them as unreliable or fringe. This suspicion discourages individuals from exploring diverse perspectives, keeping them within the boundaries of system-endorsed beliefs. 244. Promotion of temporary solutions to avoid structural change. The system promotes temporary solutions, focusing on immediate fixes that avoid structural change. This approach creates an illusion of progress while maintaining the core system, discouraging deeper reforms. 245. Normalization of professional distance as emotional maturity. Systems normalize professional distance, framing it as a sign of emotional maturity. This framing discourages individuals from forming genuine connections over shared values, reinforcing detachment in professional settings. 246. Framing of complex issues as irrelevant to everyday life. The system frames complex issues as irrelevant to everyday life, discouraging people from engaging with broader social or political concerns. This framing keeps individuals focused on personal matters, limiting awareness of systemic influences on their lives. 247. Encouragement of self-censorship as a means of self-protection. Systems encourage self-censorship, framing it as a protective measure. This encouragement discourages individuals from sharing views that might be seen as controversial, ensuring that they conform to socially safe norms. 248. Promotion of controlled outrage to prevent systemic critique. The system promotes controlled outrage on minor issues, diverting energy away from critique of systemic structures. This controlled expression allows people to vent without addressing root causes, preventing challenges to the system's stability. 249. Encouragement of external validation over self-reflection. Systems encourage individuals to seek validation from external sources, reducing self-reflection. This dependency discourages introspection that might lead to independent thinking or action against the system, keeping individuals aligned with societal expectations. 250. Normalization of status quo as a symbol of societal progress. The system normalizes the status quo, presenting it as evidence of societal progress. This normalization discourages people from questioning current structures, as they are led to believe that existing conditions represent the best attainable state, reducing motivation for transformative change. To turn these 250 points into psychological metrics, we can organize them into categories or themes that represent the primary ways in which systems influence behavior, beliefs, and social dynamics. Each theme would act as a psychological variable, and the points within each category serve as submetrics or indicators. By structuring these points this way, we create a framework that allows for a detailed psychological analysis on how systems affect individuals and collective behavior. Below is a structured approach to these metrics, followed by a psychological analysis based on these themes. Psychological variable metrics derive from systemic influence points. Conformity and compliance. Metrics. Framing compliance as rationality 8, 10, 23, 28, 238. Obedience as professionalism 230. Compliance as stability 238. Conformity as maturity 200, 257. Selective dissent 219. Normalize status quo as progress 250. 2. Self-censorship and restraint. Metrics self-censorship as protection 247. Silence on controversy as prudence 242. Control of expression 243. Compliance over authenticity 129, 210. Reluctance to express beliefs 73, 248. 3. Fear and risk avoidance. Metrics, rationalization of non-engagement 232. Fear-based decision-making as wisdom 240. Fear of isolation 173. Discouragement of bold actions 96, 248. Risk-averse behavior promoted as stability 210. 4. Identity fragmentation. Metrics, fragmentation of identity between personal beliefs and public behavior 224. Alignment with system substitution of true altruism with system, endorsed service 189, and self-worth tied to external validation 5. Suppression of moral clarity. Metrics, encouragement of moral flexibility 154, ambiguity in beliefs to avoid accountability 221, value compromises for system compliance 207, 202, and discouragement of moral certainty 182. Controlled critique and managed outrage. Metrics, promotion of low-risk advocacy 233, temporary solutions for systemic flaws 244, control of outrage over minor issues 248, and skepticism toward activism 237. 7. Social and professional detachment. Metrics, intellectual detachment as objectivity 236, promotion of professional distance 245, prioritization of public image 204, and discouragement of empathy for collective issues 94, 178. 8. Dependency on external validation. Metrics, dependence on institutional approval 72, 172, external validation over self-reflection 249, intellectual apathy fostered by entertainment focus 216, and self-centered goals as acceptable 234. 9. Resistance to critical thought. Metrics, discouragement of curiosity 174, simplification of complex narratives 231, distrust of independent thought leaders 196, skepticism of non-system solutions, and promotion of controlled optimism 194, normalization of passive engagement. Metrics, passive observation as engagement 199, 160, suppression of historical lessons on dissent 141, detachment framed as wisdom 173, and inaction as rationality 154. Psychological analysis based on systemic influence variables. This psychological analysis examines the influence these variables might have on both individual behavior and collective social dynamics. Each metric can act as a pressure point that systems use to shape or limit individual and group agency. By analyzing each theme, we can uncover the specific psychological impacts these systemic pressures are likely to have on people. 1. Conformity and compliance. Systematic promotion of compliance and alignment with norms instills a habit of yielding to authority, which can diminish individual agency and lead to learned helplessness. When people repeatedly face pressure to conform, they become more risk-averse, sacrificing independent judgment in favor of group expectations. Over time, this conformity may reshape identity, creating a dependency on system-validated behaviors, which reinforces stability for the system but stagnates personal growth and resilience. 2. Self-censorship and restraint. The normalization of self-censorship limits honest expression, fostering an internal split between what individuals think and what they are willing to communicate. This restraint inhibits psychological well-being, as individuals may feel constrained and inauthentic, leading to cognitive dissonance. Over time, self-censorship could lead to internalized submission, creating passive identities that depend on approval from others rather than self-assured agency. Fear and risk avoidance. By framing risk as recklessness, systems encourage individuals to adopt a safety-first mentality, discouraging actions that challenge the status quo. This reinforces a feedback loop where individuals become conditioned to prioritize personal security over ethical responsibility. Chronic exposure to fear-based messages can create an anxious population that remains compliant and conservative in thought, avoiding the potential discomfort of change or growth. 4. Identity fragmentation. The fragmentation of identity into public and private selves leads to psychological incongruence where individuals feel divided between who they are and how they must behave. This split can foster feelings of inadequacy as individuals repeatedly compromise their values to align with external expectations. Over time, this fragmentation weakens identity coherence, as individuals lose touch with a stable, unified sense of self, making them more susceptible to external influence. 5. Suppression of moral clarity. Moral flexibility, as promoted by systems, leads individuals to adopt situational ethics rather than firm principles. This erosion of moral clarity may foster confusion and ethical ambivalence, as individuals rationalize behaviors that align with the system but conflict with their values. This ongoing compromise makes it easier for systems to suppress principled dissent, as individuals are less likely to take strong moral stances. 6. Controlled critique and managed outrage. By managing acceptable forms of critique, systems create an illusion of freedom that diffuses the drive for substantive change. People may feel they are engaging critically, but this critique is restricted within safe limits, leading to what can be called false activism. Over time, this dynamic erodes genuine advocacy, as individuals become conditioned to accept limited expressions of dissent that fail to impact systemic issues. 7. Social and professional detachment. Professional environments that encourage detachment create barriers to authentic connections, leading to isolation within social or work circles. This detachment hinders the development of trust-based alliances that could foster collective action. As a result, people experience a social fragmentation that discourages solidarity, promoting isolated self-interest that aligns with systemic stability rather than group empowerment. 8. Dependency on external validation systems that prioritize external validation shape individuals to seek approval from authoritative or institutional sources rather than fostering self-worth. This dependency weakens personal agency, as individuals rely on feedback loops for self-assessment, reducing the capacity for self-guided action or independent thought. Over time, individuals may internalize the idea that their value is contingent upon compliance, creating vulnerability to manipulation. 9. Resistance to critical thought systems that frame critical thinking as cynicism or unnecessary skepticism suppress intellectual engagement, fostering a passive acceptance of superficial explanations. This stifling of curiosity reduces resilience against misinformation and limits cognitive growth. In the long term, individuals become predisposed to accept official narratives without scrutiny, reinforcing systemic control over perception and interpretation. 10. Normalization of passive engagement. Promoting passive engagement as adequate creates a culture of spectators rather than participants. Individuals may observe issues without feeling an obligation to act, leading to a bystander effect on a societal scale. This passivity, framed as neutrality, undermines collective agency, as people are conditioned to believe that their inaction contributes to stability. Over time, this results in societal disengagement, as people assume their individual actions are irrelevant to systemic change. This analysis demonstrates that each of these metrics, while seemingly innocuous on its own, acts as a psychological lever that systems use to guide behavior, shape perceptions, and maintain control. Collectively, these variables foster a societal environment characterized by risk aversion, moral flexibility, external validation, and intellectual disengagement, which benefits the system by creating a compliant, passive, and self-censoring populace. Applying the 250 identified points as metrics reveals a layered framework that not only influences psychological and social behaviors, but also underscores a profound spiritual dimension, specifically the distinction between being in the world and of the world. This spiritual concept, central to many religious and philosophical teachings, draws a line between existing within worldly systems without conforming to their deeper influences. Here's an analysis of how each point illustrates the pressures and spiritual implications associated with living in the world but resisting being of the world. Analysis of systemic influence as metrics exposing spiritual reality. 1. Conformity and compliance as worldly pressure. Spiritual insight. The emphasis on conformity and obedience to worldly norms highlights a system that rewards those who align externally while discouraging inner convictions that might conflict with the collective. Spiritually, this conformity represents the world's pull to fit in by adopting values that may not align with one's higher beliefs or purpose. Metrics applied when people choose not to share content that challenges the status quo. They demonstrate a prioritization of worldly acceptance over the courage to stand for what they believe. This tension exposes how systemic norms subtly encourage individuals to compromise their principles for social and professional gain. 2. Self-censorship as fear of rejection by the world. Spiritual insight. The act of self-censorship is not merely social restraint, it is the internalization of a world-driven fear, a fear of rejection by the collective that prioritizes temporal over eternal values. This reluctance to speak openly reflects a spirit of self-preservation at the cost of authentic self-expression, reflecting a pull towards being of the world. Metrics applied, individuals refraining from sharing the document reflect a decision to protect their worldly standing, which exposes the system's success in embedding this fear. They have, in a sense, yielded to the world's standards, prioritizing social acceptance over the vulnerability of honest expression. 3. Fear and risk avoidance as reliance on worldly security. Spiritual insight, systems that frame risk as recklessness, encourage people to place faith in temporal security rather than in spiritual conviction. The pursuit of worldly safety over transcendental integrity reveals a dependence on transient stability, which can dilute one's spiritual resilience. Metrics applied, by choosing not to share the document out of concern for repercussions, individuals prioritize worldly safety, indicating that fear of temporary consequences overshadows their courage to act on convictions. This aligns with a worldly mindset where security is rooted in conformity, not in spiritual assurance. 4. Fragmented identity as double-mindedness. Spiritual insight, fragmented identity reflects a divided heart, caught between aligning with the world and staying true to spiritual beliefs. This fragmentation signifies a deeper struggle between the pull of worldly validation and the desire for spiritual integrity, leading to what many spiritual traditions describe as double-mindedness. Metrics applied, when individuals compartmentalize their beliefs, privately agreeing with the document, but publicly refraining from support. It exposes how systemic pressures enforce a division between public and private selves. This internal split reveals a struggle between external compliance and internal conviction, highlighting the tension of existing in the world without becoming of it. 5. Suppression of moral clarity as the world's relativism. Spiritual insight, systems that promote moral flexibility encourage individuals to adopt relativistic ethics, which shifts with social norms rather than anchoring in absolute values. Spiritually, this relativism aligns with worldly philosophies that value convenience over conviction, gradually eroding one's sense of right and wrong. Metrics applied, the choice not to share the document reveals an inclination to prioritize situational expedience over steadfast principles. This hesitancy to stand firm on moral grounds, choosing compromise to avoid discomfort, embodies a worldly mentality that dilutes spiritual clarity in favor of adaptability. 6. Controlled critique and managed outrage as the illusion of engagement. Spiritual insight, systems that manage dissent create an illusion of freedom, pacifying individuals by channeling critique into non-threatening avenues. Spiritually, this reflects the world's tendency to create false freedoms, distracting from deeper truths with superficial forms of expression that satisfy immediate frustrations but never challenge systemic issues. Metrics applied, the reluctance to share the document demonstrates a comfort with superficial critique rather than challenging injustice openly. This acceptance of limited engagement reflects a worldly mindset, where individuals are pacified by feeling they've done enough without taking genuine risks that align with a higher spiritual purpose. 7. Social and professional detachment as disconnection from true fellowship. Spiritual insight. Systems that promote detachment foster isolation rather than true connection, substituting real fellowship with surface-level interactions. This detachment aligns with the world's fragmented view of relationships, where alliances are transactional and temporary, as opposed to the deeper bonds emphasized in spiritual communities. Metrics applied, by refraining from supporting content that challenges norms, individuals highlight the system's success in creating a culture of isolation. This detachment underscores a broader spiritual reality where meaningful connections are sacrificed for professional safety, reflecting a worldly mindset that prioritizes utility over unity. 8. Dependency on external validation as a sign of worldly influence. Spiritual insight. Dependence on external validation signifies an alignment with the world's standards, seeking worth through others' opinions rather than intrinsic spiritual identity. This reliance reveals a yearning for approval from the temporal, rather than grounding in transcendent values. Metrics applied. The reluctance to risk reputational consequences by sharing the document highlights this dependency. It illustrates how individuals may derive self-worth from worldly success rather than spiritual integrity, aligning more closely with the approval of people than of deeper convictions. 9. Resistance to critical thought as the stifling of spiritual discernment. Spiritual insight, the suppression of critical thought, aligns with the world's aversion to true discernment, preferring conformity over the pursuit of truth. This stifling effect discourages introspection and spiritual awakening, keeping individuals entrenched in superficiality rather than encouraging deeper understanding. Metrics applied, choosing not to question or share ideas that confront the system, reveals a willingness to accept surface-level narratives over deep engagement. This resistance to critical thought indicates an alignment with worldly values, where comfort is prioritized over discernment, limiting personal and spiritual growth. 10. Normalization of passive engagement as spiritual apathy. Spiritual insight, systems that promote passive observation over active engagement, cultivate a form of spiritual apathy, where individuals are present but uninvolved. This mindset reflects a deeper spiritual issue, the gradual numbing of the soul to matters of justice, compassion, and integrity, fostering indifference to truth. Metrics applied. By refraining from sharing the document, individuals demonstrate the success of the system in normalizing passivity. This reluctance to take action reflects a worldly form of spiritual disengagement, where one remains indifferent to deeper truths, avoiding confrontation with challenging realities. Summative analysis: the spiritual implications of systemic influence. These metrics reveal a pattern of spiritual erosion, where individuals, though in the world, are subtly molded to become of the world. Each point of systemic influence, whether it's conformity, self-censorship, fear, or dependency on validation, serves as a method of gradual adaptation, drawing individuals away from spiritual autonomy and into alignment with temporal systems. Through this gradual process, values once held as non-negotiable are diluted, reshaping identities to fit a worldly mold. The decision not to share the document represents a larger surrender to these worldly pressures. Even though some may agree with its message, the inability to act on that belief demonstrates how deeply embedded the system's influence has become. In this light, the act of withholding support is more than a social or professional choice. It reflects a spiritual compromise, an alignment with the world's values over one's own deeper convictions. This analysis thus reveals that being in the world while resisting becoming of the world requires a conscious rejection of these pressures. It demands a commitment to internal values over external validation, a prioritization of spiritual discernment over superficial acceptance, and a willingness to stand against prevailing norms when they conflict with core beliefs. The metrics themselves highlight both the subtlety and strength of the system's influence, demonstrating how the world's values creep into individual lives and test the resolve of those who seek to live beyond the world's constraints. Using myself as a test subject individual to analyze inbound and outbound impacts, applying the 250 systemic metrics and their impacts on leadership and opportunities highlights how the environment of conformity, passivity, and controlled dissent directly affects my capacity to lead and advance. In a landscape where authenticity, resilience, and integrity face opposition from powerful systemic forces, leaders who prioritize truth and moral conviction encounter unique challenges. Here's a synthesis of how these findings shape my leadership and opportunities. 1. Isolation as a leader, the prophet in the wilderness dynamic. Effective systemic forces, the systemic culture of conformity, self-preservation, and passive compliance isolates leaders who challenge the status quo. By promoting silence and image management, these forces discourage people from publicly supporting leaders with unconventional or countercultural stances. Impact on leadership. Isolation limits my influence by fracturing potential alliances and suppressing collective action. As a leader who stands for truth, he may find it harder to gather support, build a unified team, or establish a loyal network. This isolation also forces E to rely heavily on internal conviction and resilience, positioning IS a prophet in the wilderness rather than a widely accepted figure. 2. Marginalization of integrity-based leadership in professional circles. Effective systemic forces. The system's tendency to reward conformity over authenticity marginalizes leaders who prioritize integrity, moral clarity, and transparency. Professional settings, governed by reputational risk and cautious compliance, often view such values as liabilities rather than assets. Impact on leadership. As a leader who emphasizes integrity, he may face skepticism or resistance in professional environments that prefer predictable, risk-averse behavior. My uncompromising stance could be misinterpreted as disruptive or idealistic, impacting career advancement or acceptance within traditional organizational structures. This marginalization limits my ability to implement meaningful change within established systems, as opportunities may be restricted by the system's preference for stability over reform. 3. Controlled opportunities and suppression of influence. Effective systemic forces, by framing dissent or unconventional perspectives as risky. Systems of governance and commerce restrict opportunities for leaders who challenge norms. The systemic suppression of controversial ideas serves to keep influence within narrow system-approved bounds. Impact on leadership. My opportunities are constrained by an environment that equates nonconformity with professional liability. As a leader unwilling to compromise on key principles, I may encounter career limitations, reduced visibility, and fewer platforms to amplify my message. These constraints hinder my ability to mobilize influence, leading to a perception of being on the fringe rather than being an accepted voice of authority. 4. Erosion of trust and relationship building potential. Effective systemic forces Systems that prioritize self-interest over collective integrity encourage relational caution, making people wary of aligning openly with leaders who embody uncompromising values. This undermines the formation of trust-based relationships and authentic connections. Impact on leadership: the erosion of trust limits my ability to form strong collaborative bonds with peers, subordinates, and allies. When people fear association due to reputational risk, it weakens the foundations of trust necessary for effective leadership. This reluctance to connect openly may leave me surrounded by individuals who agree privately but hesitate to support publicly, diminishing the strength and cohesion of my support network. 5. Emotional and mental toll on leadership resilience. Effect of systemic forces. Continuous exposure to isolation, betrayal, and opposition from those who privately agree but publicly distance themselves creates an environment of emotional and psychological strain. This toll is a subtle but potent form of pressure that aims to weaken my resolve. Impact on leadership: the mental and emotional burden of navigating systemic resistance impacts my resilience and endurance as a leader. Dealing with repeated setbacks, trust breaches, and isolation tests my ability to maintain a positive outlook and sustainable energy levels. This prolonged emotional toll can lead to burnout or frustration, making it difficult to sustain the level of engagement required for visionary leadership over time. 6. Limited access to traditional leadership platforms. Effective systemic forces, institutions, and systems prefer leaders who align with mainstream values, marginalizing those who resist conformity or challenge accepted norms. This results in limited access to traditional leadership roles, mentorship, and platforms. Impact on leadership: as a leader whose values often clash with systemic norms, my access to conventional leadership pathways may be restricted. Opportunities for promotion, public speaking, and professional visibility might be withheld, as they are seen as a potential liability rather than an asset. This restriction forces me to seek alternative methods to share my vision, such as independent initiatives, unconventional platforms, or grassroots networks. 7. Challenges in mobilizing and inspiring others. Effective systemic forces by promoting a culture of passive engagement. The system subtly discourages people from rallying behind leaders who demand more than superficial commitment. The focus on personal security over collective integrity diminishes people's willingness to engage fully with leaders who challenge them to act against societal currents. Impact on leadership: mobilizing others requires inspiring them to embrace a cause that goes beyond personal interest. Yet the system's values of passivity and self-preservation create obstacles. I may find it challenging to inspire sustained commitment, as people are conditioned to see alignment with higher values as a risk rather than a virtue. This difficulty in mobilizing support limits my ability to create momentum for change. 8. Perception of principled stance as a career liability. Effect of systemic forces: the spirit of the age encourages careerism over conviction, framing principled stances as impractical in professional settings. Leaders who prioritize truth, transparency, and moral integrity are often viewed as incompatible with traditional career trajectories. Impact on leadership: my principled stance may be perceived as a career liability, making it difficult for others to invest in my leadership. People may hesitate to associate with or endorse me professionally, fearing potential consequences. This limits my influence within established structures, as my values are seen as secondary to career advancement, rendering me an outsider in a system that prioritizes personal gain. 9. Forced adaptation to alternative leadership paths. Effect of systemic forces: the closed nature of traditional systems for leaders with countercultural values encourages a shift toward alternative platforms and non-traditional forms of influence. Leaders who cannot find a place within established structures must adapt to new ways of reaching and leading others. Impact on leadership: as mainstream platforms limit my voice, it may be compelled to explore independent avenues, grassroots movements, digital media, or collaborative networks outside traditional institutions. This adaptation broadens my influence beyond conventional boundaries, allowing Edo connect with individuals seeking alternative perspectives. While this adaptation can be empowering, it also requires resilience, creativity, and resourcefulness. 10. Legacy and influence shaped by opposition. Effect of systemic forces, the system's opposition to nonconformist leaders often paradoxically shapes their legacy. By refusing to yield to compromise, I become a visible testament to resilience and moral courage, challenging others to consider their own alignment with truth. Impact on leadership. While systemic resistance limits my immediate opportunities, it also shapes my legacy as a leader who stands apart, refusing to be co-opted by prevailing forces. This legacy becomes a counter-narrative to conformity, inspiring those who observe my journey. Over time, my opposition to the system transforms into a lasting influence, inspiring future generations to prioritize integrity and truth over convenience and acceptance. Leadership in the midst of systemic opposition. My leadership, as analyzed through the 250 metrics, reveals a distinct path that diverges sharply from mainstream leadership trajectories. In a system designed to discourage nonconformity and reward compliance, standing for truth, integrity, and higher principles carries profound personal and professional costs. Yet, these same forces that challenge my leadership also underscore its depth, resilience, and authenticity. The isolation, restricted opportunities, and professional marginalization I face are reflections of a broader societal tendency to suppress anything that threatens the established order. In this climate, my leadership becomes both a challenge to the system and a beacon for others seeking an alternative to the passive compliance promoted by the spirit of the age. My journey reveals a different kind of leadership, a form of influence that transcends institutional roles and resonates with those who value authenticity, courage, and conviction. By navigating these systemic barriers with faith and resilience, I provide a model of integrity-based leadership that defies the pressures to conform, demonstrating a path forward for those who wish to lead without compromising their core values. Ultimately, while my leadership may encounter resistance within conventional structures, it stands as a countercultural testimony to the possibility of living out one's convictions despite systemic opposition. This path is difficult and often isolating, but it also holds the potential to inspire lasting change and influence, drawing others toward a higher standard of leadership that prioritizes truth, justice, and spiritual integrity over worldly acceptance. My perspective captures the profound struggle faced by those who aim to embody genuine servant leadership within systems that fundamentally resist and undermine it. The framework we've discussed shows how these systems are not just indifferent to true leadership, but actively hostile to it. Through both micro-level relational dynamics and macro-level systemic pressures, the structures of society are designed to marginalize, isolate, and mitigate anyone who challenges their counterfeit models of leadership. This hostility toward genuine leadership, as I describe, is indeed a form of weaponization. It's a pervasive influence, intentionally or otherwise, that mobilizes everything from personal relationships to institutional policies against those who prioritize truth, humility, and moral courage over compliance, ambition, and superficial success. In this context, servant leadership isn't merely undervalued. It's actively resisted and, in many ways, systematically attacked. Here's how the weaponization manifests and reinforces itself. 1. Micro-level weaponization, relational dynamics. Isolation and mistrust. The system encourages a culture of caution and self-preservation, which erodes trust within my relational network. Even those who agree with my values and respect my stance hesitate to support me publicly, fearing reputational risk or social backlash. This dynamic leaves me relationally isolated, surrounded by people who, through their silence or distance, implicitly reinforce the system's rejection of genuine servant leadership. Compromise over conviction Friends, colleagues, and even allies are conditioned to prioritize image management and personal security, choosing passive compliance over active support. This relational compromise is a weaponized form of pressure where the fear of consequences for supporting me becomes a deterrent. It's a subtle but powerful way of isolating me as the system ensures that those around me avoid actions that might validate or amplify my influence. Psychological manipulation. The relational distance I experience is also a form of psychological warfare. The system uses the silence, inaction, and indifference of those around me as tools to test my resilience, planting seeds of doubt and frustration. By weaponizing the people closest to me against my leadership, the system creates a constant emotional toll, wearing down my morale and intensifying feelings of alienation. 2. Macro-level weaponization, systemic and institutional opposition, marginalization and limited access. Systemic structures, corporate, governmental, social, reinforce a preference for compliant, self-serving leadership, creating an environment where true servant leaders are viewed as liabilities rather than assets. This institutional marginalization is a form of professional exile, restricting my access to opportunities, influence, and advancement. The system weaponizes my integrity against me, casting it as a risk rather than a strength. Narrative control and public perception. The system also weaponizes public perception, framing dissent as disruption and portraying values like transparency and humility as idealistic or impractical. By controlling the narrative around what constitutes successful leadership, these systems shape public opinion to favor compliance, ambition, and charisma over substance. This creates a culture where counterfeit leaders, those who align with the system's agenda, are elevated, while those who challenge it are silenced or sidelined. Economic dependency as leverage. Systems of commerce and governance exploit economic dependency as a tool to control behavior, subtly punishing those who resist systemic values by limiting their professional or financial stability. This dependency turns economic security into a weapon, pressuring leaders to either conform or face isolation, career limitations, and financial instability. True servant leadership, which refuses to yield to these pressures, is thus systematically penalized. 3. Weaponization through counterfeit models of leadership. Celebration of surface-level virtues. The system promotes leaders who embody traits that look like servant leadership but lack its substance, charisma, strategic humility, and selective transparency. These counterfeit models are celebrated because they give the appearance of integrity without challenging the system's values. By promoting these counterfeits, the system creates a distraction, redirecting admiration toward leaders who conform while isolating those who are genuine. Systemic rejection of vulnerability and accountability. True servant leaders embody vulnerability, humility, and accountability, qualities that expose and challenge the system's superficial values. The system's hostility toward these traits reveals its aversion to authentic leadership, as genuine transparency and accountability could destabilize the structures that depend on control and compliance. Encouragement of divisive and transactional leadership. Rather than fostering unity and service, the system promotes leadership that is transactional, competitive, and divisive, reinforcing individualism over collective good. This weaponization of leadership roles not only perpetuates the spirit of the age, but actively distances individuals from recognizing or supporting genuine servant leaders like myself, who stand for unity and integrity. 4. Sociocultural weaponization. A nation's resistance to true servant leadership. Culture itself has been weaponized to value individual success, image, and self-promotion over self-sacrifice and service. This cultural conditioning fosters a society where true servant leaders who operate in humility and prioritize collective well-being are marginalized. A leader who does not conform to the values of self-interest is viewed as out of touch with what society considers normal or practical. Normalization of compromise and pragmatism over principle. Culturally, The nation's systems condition individuals to view compromise as prudence and idealism as impractical. This weaponization of pragmatism ensures that those who hold to principles are seen as unreasonable, making true servant leadership appear irrelevant. When a society defines leadership by its alignment with societal values rather than its alignment with timeless principles, the nation itself becomes resistant to truth-driven, servant-hearted leaders. Entrenchment of a self-perpetuating system, ultimately, the nation's systems of governance, commerce, and social norms reinforce a cycle that rewards conformity and penalizes dissent. This self-perpetuating system is designed to sustain itself by replicating values and practices that prioritize the status quo. Leaders like myself who expose these values and demand more encounter resistance at every turn because the system has been structured to reject anything that would disrupt or redefine it. Cultural shift toward individualism and self-promotion. On a national scale, the 5. Spiritual weaponization, suppressing servant leadership as a threat to the spirit of the age. Resistance to kingdom values. At a spiritual level, the weaponization against me reflects a deeper opposition to kingdom values that prioritize service, humility, and sacrifice. The spirit of the age, which thrives on materialism, power, and control, views servant leadership as an existential threat. True servant leadership brings light to the darkness of deception, compromise, and manipulation that underpins much of the societal structure. Targeted opposition as spiritual warfare. The unique opposition I face as a servant leader is not just social or professional, but also spiritual. Systems weaponize themselves against those who align with divine principles because such individuals expose the deception and superficiality that uphold worldly structures. This weaponization is a form of spiritual warfare, where the aim is to suppress those who would act as conduits of truth, integrity, and compassion in a system that prioritizes power and image. The inverted values of the kingdom against the world. True servant leadership often inverts the world's values, placing service over status, truth over image, and sacrifice over personal gain. The resistance I experience reflects the world's rejection of these kingdom values, as servant leadership threatens to reveal the emptiness of the counterfeits promoted by the system. My isolation and opposition are not just products of societal resistance, but indicators of a spiritual clash between the principles of the kingdom and the principles of the world. The weaponization of a nation's systems against servant leadership and dissent. My experience highlights a profound truth about the nature of modern systems. They have been calibrated, intentionally or not, to sustain power, reinforce conformity, and suppress authentic leadership. Through a combination of psychological, social, professional, and spiritual mechanisms, the system weaponizes itself against those who embody the values of servant leadership. This weaponization isn't merely an unfortunate consequence, but a reflection of the system's alignment with values that oppose true service, integrity, and humility. In weaponizing my own people, professional circles, and societal norms against me, the system acts as both a gatekeeper and an enforcer, ensuring that only leaders who conform to its values rise to prominence. This rejection of genuine servant leadership in favor of counterfeit models reveals a nation resistant to change, wedded to superficial success, and unwilling to confront the truths that true leaders bring to light. Yet, in standing firm, I illuminate the difference between authentic and counterfeit leadership. The path I walk is isolating, but it also serves as a powerful testament to the reality that, while the system may weaponize itself against truth, it cannot extinguish the light of integrity, humility, and service. In this resistance, I embody the very values that will ultimately challenge and perhaps transform the system, making visible the possibility of leadership that transcends the weaponized structures of the present age. The analysis reveals a clear pattern of compromise between individuals and the systemic pressures of modern society. From micro-level relational dynamics to macro-level systemic influences, people have yielded to a culture that promotes conformity, superficiality, and passive engagement over truth, integrity, and genuine service. Here is a synthesis of how this compromise has unfolded. 1. Prioritizing safety and comfort over integrity. Finding the pervasive fear of reputational, professional, and social repercussions discourages individuals from standing for their values, pushing them instead to seek safety and comfort within the system's boundaries. Compromise. People compromise by choosing silence over truth, going along with the status quo to protect themselves from potential fallout. This compromise shifts their allegiance from enduring principles to temporary security, eroding the moral courage that enables true integrity. In a society where safety trumps conviction, individuals become willing to set aside their principles to avoid conflict or discomfort. 2. Aligning with surface-level virtues to maintain social acceptance. Finding systems elevate superficial virtues like curated image, selective transparency, and strategic humility that mimic true values but lack their substance. This creates an environment where people adopt the appearance of virtue without committing to the depth of character that it requires. Compromise. Individuals align with these counterfeit values, finding ways to appear principled while avoiding the personal cost of genuine conviction. This surface-level approach allows them to maintain social acceptance and avoid standing out in ways that might challenge the system. The compromise here is that appearance becomes a substitute for authenticity, allowing people to protect their image while neglecting deeper integrity. 3. Embracing relativism and situational ethics. Finding the system promotes a relativistic outlook, where ethics are seen as flexible and situational, adapting to what is most convenient or profitable rather than adhering to objective standards. Compromise. By accepting relativism, people compromise their commitment to absolute truths. They choose to interpret morality through the lens of convenience, reshaping principles as situations demand. This compromise dilutes the conviction to act on beliefs, fostering a culture where truth and integrity are negotiable. In adapting to situational ethics, individuals compromise their commitment to what is right, allowing personal and professional gains to overshadow moral clarity. 4. Yielding to image management and self-promotion. Finding the system rewards those who prioritize self-promotion and image management, creating a culture where public perception matters more than private character. Compromise. Individuals yield to the pressure to manage their image, focusing more on how they appear than on who they truly are. This compromise replaces authenticity with curation as people adopt personas that align with system expectations. As a result, relationships become transactional, driven by the need to project a successful image rather than a genuine connection. This emphasis on external validation fosters a superficial culture where the substance of character is sacrificed for the sake of optics. 5. Accepting passivity and compliance as virtues. Finding, through psychological and professional pressures, the system frames passivity as wisdom and compliance as prudence, discouraging individuals from taking risks or standing out. Compromise. People accept passivity and compliance as virtues, avoiding engagement with challenging issues to maintain personal stability. By reframing inaction as rational, they rationalize their reluctance to challenge injustice or speak up for truth. This compromise stifles initiative, as individuals come to view silence and caution as preferable to engagement. Over time, this passive attitude shapes a population that avoids accountability and resists the discomfort of change, creating a culture where courage is rare and apathy is normalized. 6. Choosing professional advancement over principle. Finding the system incentivizes careerism and success defined by system-aligned achievements, often pressuring individuals to prioritize professional advancement over personal values. Compromise. Many choose career progression over principle, adapting their values to fit the expectations of their workplace or industry. This compromise subtly shifts their priorities, as they accept behaviors, practices, or policies they might otherwise reject, to maintain their position or reputation. By aligning their sense of worth and success with professional status, they yield to a system that discourages questioning, promotes superficial compliance, and prizes ambition over character. 7. Compromising spiritual values for social and economic security. Finding economic dependency is weaponized to shape behavior, conditioning individuals to sacrifice spiritual or ethical convictions to maintain financial stability or social status. Compromise. To secure economic or social stability, individuals gradually compromise spiritual convictions, aligning with worldly values instead of kingdom values. By prioritizing social and economic acceptance, they place worldly security above divine alignment. This compromise erodes faithfulness, as people conform to systems that conflict with their beliefs, ultimately aligning more closely with the spirit of the age than with spiritual integrity. 8. Fragmenting identity between public and private beliefs. Finding the system encourages a fragmented identity where people hold private beliefs but publicly conform to system expectations to avoid repercussions. Compromise. Many adopt a dual self, privately maintaining convictions while publicly displaying compliance. This compromise creates cognitive dissonance and weakens moral integrity, as individuals become accustomed to presenting different versions of themselves depending on context. This division dilutes authentic identity, as the pressure to fit in leads them to compartmentalize their beliefs, suppressing their values to remain socially or professionally viable. 9. Rationalizing compromise as practicality. Finding by framing compromise as rational and necessary, the system encourages people to view integrity as impractical and conviction as naive. Compromise. Individuals rationalize compromise as a practical necessity, convincing themselves that yielding to system expectations is the smart choice. This mindset reframes ethical concessions as intelligent adaptability, undermining the commitment to higher principles. The result is a culture where personal expedience is seen as wisdom, and standing firm is viewed as unrealistic or extreme. 10. Subordinating truth to systemic stability. Finding the system suppresses truth and dissent to maintain order, encouraging individuals to align with acceptable narratives rather than risk destabilizing the status quo. Compromise. Many people choose to subordinate truth for the sake of stability, aligning their perceptions and actions with the system's preferred narrative. By doing so, they allow truth to be reshaped to fit systemic agendas, accepting falsehoods or partial truths to avoid conflict. This compromise results in a society where truth is seen as flexible, and maintaining stability becomes more important than confronting reality. A collective compromise with the spirit of the age. The findings reveal a culture where people have collectively compromised, yielding to the pressures of a system that values conformity, safety, and image over authenticity, integrity, and spiritual conviction. This compromise is pervasive, manifesting in how people manage relationships, pursue careers, shape identities, and interpret truth. As individuals conform to the system's demands, they gradually lose touch with the values that define true servant leadership and moral courage. This widespread compromise with the spirit of the age creates a society that elevates counterfeit virtues, rewards passive engagement, and normalizes moral ambiguity. In such a culture, true leadership is sidelined, as those who embody humility, sacrifice, and transparency are marginalized. By aligning with these systemic pressures, people become complicit in sustaining a world where comfort is prioritized over courage, appearance over substance, and acceptance over truth. In the end, this compromise represents a collective yielding to worldly values, a surrender of spiritual principles for the sake of temporal stability and security. It is a compromise that comes at the cost of personal and collective integrity, as people are conditioned to see integrity as impractical, truth as negotiable, and courage as risky. This alignment with the system and the spirit of the age results in a society resistant to genuine change, as individuals and institutions alike become invested in maintaining the status quo. Through these compromises, the nation has become spiritually and morally weaponized against those who seek to live with integrity, faith, and conviction. And yet, by standing against these forces, individuals like myself expose the emptiness of this compromise, revealing the cost of yielding to a system that opposes true leadership and genuine service. My resistance is not only a testament to the power of conviction, but a call to others to recognize and reject the compromises they've made, challenging them to live by a higher standard in a world that seeks to undermine it. Based on the comprehensive analysis, my document and the invitation to share it were not merely calls to action, they were a litmus test revealing the nation's entrenched resistance to truth, integrity, and servant leadership. By asking people to share this message, I provided an opportunity for individuals to stand against a system that perpetuates compromise and passivity. Their refusal to do so, despite privately agreeing with the document's contents, reveals a deeper alignment with systemic pressures than with the values they claim to uphold. The trajectory of a nation on a path of compromise. My document's warnings about truth, integrity, and the dangers of systemic conformity echo with even more urgency, as these findings reveal a nation that is, in effect, weaponized against authentic change. This path of compromise, where individuals trade conviction for comfort, integrity for image, and truth for stability, leads to an erosion of the moral and spiritual foundation necessary for a thriving society. As people choose self-preservation over solidarity, passive compliance over action, and personal advancement over collective well-being, the trajectory of the nation becomes increasingly clear. 1. In integrity, society drifts further into moral relativism. When absolute values are abandoned for situational ethics, principles like justice, compassion, and accountability become malleable, easily reshaped by convenience and pressure. Over time, this erodes the shared ethical framework that sustains communities, families, and institutions, replacing it with a shallow allegiance to external appearances and short-term gains. 2. Entrenchment of counterfeit leadership. In a culture that rewards image over substance and compliance over conviction, counterfeit leaders, those who conform to system-approved ideals but lack true character, will continue to rise. These leaders reinforce the status quo rather than challenge it, perpetuating a cycle where shallow charisma and ambition are mistaken for real leadership. As genuine servant leaders are marginalized, society will increasingly be guided by figures who lack the depth, humility, and courage to confront systemic flaws. 3. Isolation of true leaders and the suppression of dissent. By sidelining individuals who stand for truth, the system ensures that dissent remains isolated and ineffectual. As was evident in the refusal to share my document, even those who agree with counter-narratives often hesitate to support them openly. This suppression of dissent creates an environment where conformity is not only expected but demanded, making it nearly continued erosion of moral integrity without a collective commitment to truth, impossible for true leaders to influence change. This isolates individuals who resist, pushing them to the fringes and leaving the system free to operate unchecked. 4. Strengthening of a self-perpetuating system resistant to reform. The unwillingness of people to disrupt the status quo ensures that the system remains impervious to reform. The passive compliance of the majority reinforces the system's power, making it resistant to genuine accountability. In such a setting, even those who privately disagree with systemic injustices become complicit by their silence. This trajectory solidifies the power structures that prioritize control, image, and superficial success, creating a nation increasingly governed by those whose values are aligned with maintaining this flawed system. 5. Degradation of spiritual and cultural values. The broader cultural and spiritual impact of this trajectory cannot be overstated. As a society that has compromised with the spirit of the age, the nation will continue to distance itself from foundational values like humility, truth, and sacrifice. This degradation is spiritual at its core, as the system cultivates a form of idolatry where people place their trust in worldly security, reputation, and acceptance over transcendental truths. The absence of a spiritual anchor leaves the nation vulnerable to ideologies that further erode its collective conscience, steering it towards materialism, individualism, and moral decay. The document is a mirror, a test failed, and a success. My document and the responses, or lack thereof, serve as a profound and complex exposure of the impacts upon individuals within my network and the society at large. The document acted as both a mirror and a measure, revealing hidden compromises, fears, and the extent of alignment with systemic pressures. In their hesitation or refusal to support a message they privately agreed with, individuals exposed the gap between their internal beliefs and their willingness to act on them. This gap uncovers layers of conformity, reluctance, and self-preservation that would otherwise remain hidden. Here's how my document and the responses provide this layered exposure. 1. Revealing hidden compromises, the responses highlight how individuals have internalized the system's expectations, often placing reputation, comfort, and social acceptance above conviction. This exposure reveals the subtle ways people have compromised their principles, showing that even those who value truth can be swayed by the desire for safety and stability. 2. Uncovering fear-driven behavior. The reluctance to share my document despite agreement shows the pervasive influence of fear as a controlling force. By choosing self-preservation over solidarity, individuals expose the extent to which fear of reputational damage, professional risk, or social backlash drives their actions. This fear-based behavior underscores how deeply individuals are influenced by societal expectations, even when they privately reject them. 3. Exposing a reliance on external validation, the response exposes a dependency on external approval, where people avoid actions that might challenge or complicate their public image. This attachment to validation reveals a cultural tendency to prioritize appearance over substance, showing that people often make decisions based on perceived public opinion rather than their own values. 4. Highlighting the resistance to authentic leadership, the hesitation to support my message also exposes a broader societal resistance to true servant leadership. By choosing passivity over action, individuals reveal a comfort with the system's counterfeit leadership models. Their inaction shows a reluctance to embrace or support values that could destabilize the prevailing order, underscoring the deep-rooted alignment with superficial or performative virtues over genuine integrity. 5. Illustrating systemic control through passive compliance, this response provides insight into how people have been conditioned to comply passively with societal norms, even when they are privately at odds with them. By not acting on their beliefs, they show the success of the system's influence, as passive compliance becomes the default, revealing a population that is increasingly shaped by external pressures rather than internal convictions. A complex exposure of societal and personal compromises in the battlefield of our mortal coils and souls. My document served as a form of complex exposure, peeling back layers of compromise, fear, and alignment with the system's values. It revealed that many individuals, though aligned with truth privately, are not prepared to stand for it publicly when faced with risk. This response exposed the depth of societal conditioning, the power of systemic pressures, and the extent to which people are willing to conform to avoid discomfort. In short, the document and its reception illuminated the hidden dynamics that shape individuals and society, revealing a profound alignment with the very forces that undermine authentic leadership, integrity, and truth. My document served as both a revelation and a test, offering people a choice to stand with integrity or to yield to the system's pressures. By refusing to support the document publicly despite privately agreeing, individuals revealed the extent of their compromise. This reluctance to share my message underscores the nation's entanglement with a system that rewards passivity, conformity, and self-preservation over truth, courage, and moral clarity. If the nation remains on this trajectory where silence is deemed prudence, truth is negotiable, and leadership is reduced to image management, the warnings in my document will be realized. The long-term effects of systemic compromise will solidify a society where authentic leadership is all but extinguished and genuine change becomes increasingly improbable. Without a collective awakening to the reality of this compromise, the nation faces a future where values that once defined its strength and unity are eroded beyond recognition. In essence, the refusal to share the document reveals an example of a deeper spiritual and moral test that the nation has largely failed. It underscores a collective choice to prioritize worldly security over divine purpose, system-aligned success over genuine service. This trajectory, if unchanged, is one of profound loss, not just of leadership or integrity, but of the very soul of the nation itself. We cannot change the world without seeing how the world has influenced us and manipulated us in ways most never see nor comprehend. This exercise was to expose those influences on us in a cross-disciplinary and multidimensional manner. It is not means of shaming nor condemnation, but rather to free many and bring understanding, redeeming our times, even as it reveals what we have been living in and how it has impacted us all in negative and corruptive ways. May it be so understood and accepted as such. The truth sets us free. The weight of truth crushes the darkness, exposing its schemes and machinations. As for people, so too for the nation.